Well, and I think that's the big thing too, because you see all these, like, I call them dyno queens, but like the numbers that people throw out for stuff on some of these new DI motors, it won't do that on the racetrack. Tuning on the dyno and tuning on the racetrack is two so insanely different things. And if you tried to run those Lambda numbers for an entire lap, let alone 8 hours, it just melt the turbo.
Welcome to the HPA Tuned In podcast. I'm Andre, your host, and in this episode, we're joined by Greg Strom from Strom Motorsports in the US. Greg has got a very, very elaborate and interesting backstory. He's gone through just about anything and everything in the performance automotive space. He's a race driver who's raced at the top levels of GT racing, both in the US and in Australia. He's a driving coach. He's a race engineer. He now runs a motorsport business, building cars and supplying parts, and he's also got a fairly thorough understanding of aftermarket engine management, some of the more subtle aspects that go into engine management systems on current generation direct injected engines. This is something we haven't dived into too much in detail so far in the podcast. When it comes to port-injected engines, adding aftermarket standalone engine control is a relatively well-trodden path, but in the direct injected world, this is definitely not quite so common, and a lot of people are either converting direct injected engines to port injection, or if they are remaining direct injection, then quite often, or most often, they will actually be tuned using a reflash package to basically recalibrate the factory engine management system. We talked to Greg about his B48 BMW engine package that he provides that can be tuned anywhere from about 260 wheel horsepower up to 460 wheel horsepower, all on a completely stock standard unopened junkyard engine. This is cost-effective racing. Controlling a sophisticated engine like this, though, is not quite so straightforward, and here Brett has gravitated towards the MoTeC product range. So we talk a lot about the integration of the MoTeC control strategies with these late model direct injected engines, why direct injected engines can provide more power potential than a port injected engine, how we can incorporate more fuel with port injectors once we exceed the capability of the stock direct injectors, and we also get down in the weeds with some aspects such as fuel pressure control, characterizing direct injectors and direct injected pumps, and also how the engine performance is affected by aspects such as injection timing, fuel pressure, lambda target, and if you have got port injectors added in addition to the direct injectors, how the ratio between port and direct injector can influence this as well. Before we jump into our chat, for those who are new to the Tuned In podcast, High Performance Academy is an online training school. We specialize in teaching people how to build performance engines, how to tune EFI, how to construct wiring harnesses. We also cover topics on fabrication, 3D modeling and CAD, race driver education, and data logging, just to name a few. You can find all of our courses at hpacademy.com/courses. All of these courses are delivered in high-definition video modules that you can watch from anywhere in the world, provided you've got an internet connection. This means you can learn from the comfort of your own place and you can learn at your own pace. All of our courses also come with a 60-day, no questions asked, money-back guarantee. So if you purchase them for any reason at all, decide it wasn't quite what you expected, no problem, let us know. We'll give you a full refund. And for podcast listeners, you can also use the coupon code podcast75. That will get you $75 off the purchase of your very first HPA course. We'll put the coupon code in the show notes to make it nice and easy for you to find. Lastly, if you like free stuff, then I've got a great deal for you. We are constantly partnering with some of the biggest names in the aftermarket performance industry to give away some great prizes. You can always find our latest prize at hpacademy.com/giveaway. It might be an aftermarket ECU or dash. It could be some engine components or engine building tools, or just about anything in between. They are great prizes, and we will ship them free of charge to your door if you're the winner. There's no tricks here, no purchase required to get your name into the draw. All right, enough with our introduction. Let's get into our interview now. All right, welcome to the podcast, Brett. Thanks for joining us today. And as we do every episode, let's start by learning how you got involved in cars, or how you got an interest in cars.
Yeah, I mean, I've always loved racing since I was a kid, like RC cars for sure, before I could drive real cars. And like always wanting to race, but as everyone knows, it's super, super expensive. And when I say race, I mean road race. I was always, or I call it road racing in the US, but circuit GT racing, I guess, and touring cars. But yeah, did a lot of, had my first car was an E30 325 and, learned to work on that. My dad or my parents are like not mechanical at all. So kind of had to figure everything out from scratch and worked at a shop cleaning the floors to kind of learn what I could. Yeah, I got to do my very first track day actually. So this was, I think it was like 1997 and I was 16 and I got to tag along with the shop I was working for and do, like, I was just going to help people with their cars, whether they change tires, whatever. It was like a private track day thing, but I got to bring my E30 and I drove, I think it was just an open track at Willow Springs. So I drove like 3+ hours in my car, just annihilated the tires and then got to drive my boss's E30 M3 and then got to drive a old 2002 race car, like a 76 2002, I think it was. And just, I think I got like 6 hours of track time in one day. Like everyone was just like, okay, get off track. Like
that sounds like the dream. And you said 16?
Yeah, I was 16. So that was,
wow.
That's where it started. And then it was hard to get back there because like going to the track still costs a lot of money. So,
yeah, racing isn't cheap.
Yeah. And even just track days, I mean, any of it. So yeah, I really wanted to pursue that, but went to college and was doing track days just as when I could, but it was really like twice a year and some autocrossing. So long story short, though, then weirdly, I got in a really bad car accident on the street and took me about a year to walk again from that.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so the funny part about that, though, is so I was still in college and I was pursuing mechanical engineering and business degree, but I was really into sports before, or not like really into sports, but was pretty athletic before that. And I kind of messed up my legs pretty good in that car accident. So my dad picked up an E46 M3 with the SMG, like they had just come out with that. And we started doing track days with that because it was a lot easier for me to drive because I couldn't shift. And so, yeah, he kind of took pity on me and like we got to go to the track doing that. And I was definitely quick. So the weird part after I'd healed a little further is I convinced him to help me get an E30 M3 race car to go racing in BMW Club on the West Coast.
It sounds like there's a very strong BMW flavor in your background here. As we'll find out as we get further into this, sort of carries through to the current projects you're involved with.
Yeah, and I didn't have any like huge love for BMW when I was a kid. It was nothing specific. My brother's first car was a Nissan 240Z or a Datsun 240Z. No, it just happened to be that I picked up an E30 325 because that's what I could afford, and that was, you could turn it into a pretty good little car to drive on the street. But no, there was no like, it wasn't like I had some huge brand passion at the time, but I definitely, once I got that E30, I definitely started to get into it and started seeing DTM racing and the history of the E30 M3. And it was weird. I got that car because that's what I could afford. And I wanted a rear wheel drive car.
That sounds hilarious now with the price of E30 M3s. It's a car that I've kind of always had an interest in owning one, but the value proposition now, I can't get my head around. I mean, here in New Zealand for a decent, tidy one, just a street car, not a race car, you're probably circa 150,000 New Zealand dollars. What's that, maybe? I guess that'd be about 80,000-90,000 USD. And I mean, I'd probably get some hate from the BMW lovers. I mean, in all honesty, in stock form, they're not that great. They're definitely not fast.
Yeah. I mean, E30 M3 is, and a lot of them have a lot of miles, but is a complete letdown when you go drive it. Like it's so slow until and if you can do a lot of stuff and they have so much history, which is what makes them cool. But, I would take an E36 M3 or an E46 M3 over that car any day if I just want to go drive. And on the track, they are like, it's kind of pathetic unless compared to modern cars, especially, but you can do a lot of stuff to them. And my old boss that I used to race with, we were building S14s that were going to 9,000 RPM, and I'll get into that later, but you can make them very quick, but man, I mean, like a core motor now is like $27,000. It's like, it's not, you don't buy it to go have fun. You buy it because you have some love for the brand or your collector or something. So
yeah, of course. While we're hating on the E30 M3, I mean, I also grew up in the era of Australian touring car racing where the Group A M3s were decimating some cars that on paper should have been far, far quicker around a racetrack like Bathurst. So yeah, it's not to say they can't go fast, just in stock form, hey, it needs a lot of work and that requires a lot of money to be tipped into them.
Yeah, and I mean, I will say too, I just put a I think when they were new back in the day, certainly for what was available at the time, they are, in terms of the handling, like so much better. And they punch above their weight. Like, if you're just going off of what they make horsepower wise is on paper, it's terrible, but on the track, they still run a good lap time. So I will say one of the better classes out here for racing, for spec racing, is the spec E30. An original 325 had about the same wheel horsepower as an M3. I've had some of my best races in that class. When you get 30 of those cars on track together, it's a lot of fun for sure.
Yeah. I think that's something that can be said for spec racing, irrespective of which particular car it is. I mean, it's easy when there's a relatively open rule book. I mean, yeah, I'll just make up for a lack of driver talent with another 30 horsepower, and to a degree that works up to a point. But when you've got a field of cars that are probably separated by 5 to 10 horsepower at the absolute most, and they all have the same suspension and brakes, then it really truly does show driver talent, I think.
Well, it's also, and the way, like, for example, like an E30 handles, I mean, it's not a good rear suspension on that thing. So you go do a qualifying lap and you're just like, that was such a good lap. Like I was just freaking on the edge, every corner, smashed every curb, like just rode the ever living crap out of this thing. And you look at the lap time and you're like, holy crap, that was slow. But like you felt like a hero in the thing. So, I mean, there is that to be said about it too.
Yeah. I think there's something to be said for, I'm not calling it necessarily a slow car, but there's more enjoyment in a slow car being driven fast than a fast car being driven maybe just average, I think. Knowing that, like you just said, you've extracted everything you could out of that lap. There's nothing left on the table.
Yeah. That's one thing I was going to say too, because I'm a car guy, but I'm a racer at heart. Like that's what I love the most, is like door-to-door racing and extracting the most out of the car. And what's interesting about that is I certainly enjoy driving a balanced car. If you give me a car that's 800 horsepower and it's just completely overwhelming the suspension and the tires and everything, that's not fun for me anymore. You're just annoying.
I get it.
And what's actually really interesting, I find that a lot of drivers you take, that aren't at a high level in a super high powered heavy car, you take power away and they will often go faster. And there's a series out here at a racetrack. It's a club track where they have all M2 CSRs. I don't know if you're familiar with those race cars.
Very, very vaguely.
Yeah. So it's a factory race car from BMW. It's an M2, has no aero. It weighs 3,600 pounds with the driver. It's on 280 width slicks. I mean, the thing's a pig. It's got 420 wheel horsepower. And so we're out here in the desert, and when they have a particularly hot race, they'll pull the power sticks and drop them down to like 360 at the wheels. More than half the field goes faster.
Wow.
Like it's absurd to watch, because they can actually, they're braking at the right spot coming into the corner. They're not overwhelming. They're not just understeering like crazy past the apex. Like, it's pretty funny to watch. But and these are all like, it's a members track that they're doing this at, so it's older rich guys. But it's funny. They all go. A lot of them go quicker with a slower power.
I think that sort of for maybe a non-professional driver does make sense, though, because you can use the power that's available, and you don't feel like you're sort of walking that tightrope of whether the thing's going to break loose, go sideways, and put you out into the kiddie litter. It's just easier for a novice.
Well, the time when you look at the data, it's all, because I do some coaching, it's all in the braking zones on the long straights, because they're so fast coming in the corner, they can't judge it correctly. And then they blow the entry and they don't roll the speed. So they lose the 7 mile an hour they gained down the straight, they lose entering that corner and successive corners, So it's interesting. It seems to all be in the approach to the corners, not necessarily the exits.
Okay. Well, I think we've thoroughly derailed our convo so far, but that's all right. It's all interesting stuff. But we'll sort of get back at we started this journey where we were talking about your E30 M3 race car. You also mentioned your mechanical engineering degree. On that note, with the mechanical engineering degree, where at that point were you sort of seeing your life going in terms of what you were going to do for a job?
Well, what I should say is I actually don't have a mechanical engineering degree. I took a couple of years of it, and I was trying to double major in business as well, because that was sort of the deal I made with my parents, that they're like, you can do whatever you want as long as you also get a business degree and help me go to school. So the things I was doing at the time, and would definitely do things a little differently, of course. But I was in school long enough at that point, and that car accident put me behind quite a bit. So I had to make a decision that I was like, I'm going to be in school for another like 2.5 years, or I could just knock out this business degree in a year and go work, which is what I really wanted to do. So I went to USC, and all their engineering math classes were taught by math professors and not engineering professors. And I am a very conceptual person. Like, I need to understand how things work in the physical world. So they would just like write these equations on the board, and this, some of them are like Eastern European or Chinese or whatever. So it's like super thick accent. Here's the equation. Here's how you solve the equation. And I'm like, yeah, what do you do with this?
Yeah, I kind of get that as well.
Yeah. And they're like, who cares? You just solve the equation. That's like, so I was like, okay, this isn't for me. And I'm not, once I got to differential equations, I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. So I do love math. I do love physics. I just realized that path and what I was trying to do was a waste of time and a waste of money. So I still, I can still do derivatives and all the things that you need to do sometimes when you're trying to figure out what a PID loop is doing. But the formal education, I wasn't interested in at that point. Yeah. So anyway, I was, at the time I had started racing. Like I said, I got that E30 M3, and I think we picked it up for like 14 grand, and it was just a total pile of junk. Like, looking back on that car now, is just, that thing was an absolute mess. The wiring was a disaster. I think it had been on fire at one point. I mean, I don't think I would sign that car off with an annual tech at this point if I saw it now, but that's what I got. That's what I learned in. And was immediately won my first race with it, which was obviously very exciting, and kind of was really, really, really passionate about driving more than anything, and learning to race. So I would do a race weekend, and it was difficult for me to afford a lot of track time. So that was somewhat limited, but I would take my video, and this was before data logs were common. This was like 2004. So I was trying to get some sort of data logging thing, but it was difficult. So I would watch my video, like literally probably 15 hours, like just over and over and over, and take notes and learn and read all the books and do all the stuff and think about it and watch racing. So got really, really, really into it. And so I was pretty quick out of the box, and people asked me to start coaching them pretty quickly. And then I realized, okay, well, like, beyond the driving, now I'm a good driver. The car's a pile of crap. So really figuring out how to, like, all the suspension stuff, and the rules were limited. So power was actually not a thing at the time. We had to run a stock ECU and those things. But yeah, I was really just trying to learn as much as I could, and was super passionate about it. So when I graduated from college, it was kind of a weird circumstance. And it's funny because it sort of set up my whole life in a way. I had to have a couple more surgeries, so I couldn't go work right away. But the guys that I was racing with were like, hey, just when you like come do parts and stuff at the shop with us, like, we'll just work here while you're figuring it out. So I started doing that, and I was able to work on my race car after work. And then I just stayed. Like, it was like, okay,
you're part of the furniture now.
The short version, because it's, a multi-year story, is just that was a BMW service shop, and I raced with the owner, raced with the other guys that were there. We were all racers. So we'd all bring in our cars after work and work on them till 11 o'clock at night, and, moved up to managing the shop for a while doing that. And yeah, just got really, really, really into the racing side, but was just doing more street service during the day to pay the bills. And then got more into motor building and realized, like, oh, these stock ECUs, whether it was on an E30 M3 or an E46 I had at the time, was like, this isn't working. Could not get the cars to run right, basically. Constant problems. So
what were the issues that you were seeing with the stock ECUs?
One was actually finding anyone that could tune them. So this was around 2007 where I started to get into that stuff. And, so I'd put the thing on the dyno, and the air fuel would be all, like, the way we were doing that back then was you just get a chip from a guy that's like, oh, this is the right, this is the tune for the motor that you have. And in hindsight, I'm just like, oh my God.
Yeah, that doesn't work.
A joke. No. And these are, and this is like the stuff we were running. There's no closed loop lambda. There's no, like, it's
very, very basic,
super old stuff. Yeah.
I actually remember exactly the same situation. There was a couple of the BMW spec series races that I used to run their cars on the dyno. These guys were actually pretty serious about it as well. And you weren't allowed a programmable ECU, but you could chip the factory ECU, and we'd run the car on the dyno, and the guy would come in with a suitcase full of all of these little chips to try, and these were these chips that are being sold over eBay or wherever it was, and guaranteed to give you 13 more horsepower and all of this, and you'd run them all, and they were all absolute garbage. None of them were anywhere close to the mark, but that was the best they could do. And I didn't have the ability to actually burn a new EEPROM for them, so it is what it is.
Yeah, and some of the classes also required, like you had to run a stock ECU. There wasn't a choice. But I was starting to get into what was called the mod class. And so then the only rules were really like based on displacement. Like you had to run, between a 2.2 and a 2.97 liter was like the cutoff that they did for a specific class that was really popular. Yeah, so my boss had an E30 M3 and we were building better and better engines, and the tuning just was not keeping up. And it would like go into fault, like not fault mode, but it would just wig out and the car would just start misfiring or just weird stuff. So I was like, okay, well, and I had built a 2.97 liter engine for this specific class with huge cams and high, like 13-to-1 compression, I think, an old BMW 6-cylinder, and just tried to run it with what people claimed would be the right software or the right chip at the time, and it was horrible. So decided I was going to figure out standalone, and had seen it, kind of knew enough about it. But so I actually took I knew I needed to know the basics, so I took an EFI 101 class from Ben
Strader.
Yeah, and that was fantastic. Got to go spend 2 days with him and learn in a whole group, and it really taught me also like how to think about these things, because he really is a first principles thinker and teacher. So the fact that I understood like, okay, more air, more fuel, less timing, like these are the fundamentals of this thing. I was like, but what ECU do I get? And so I researched it, and I was like, well, if I'm going to do this, you got to do it. So I picked up an M800 and just went straight to what I perceived as the best at the time, and I think it relatively is.
Still actually an incredibly powerful ECU even now. I think one of the drivers behind moving on from them is they were struggling to get some of the chips that they used to make the old 100 series ECUs. But I ran one on my drag car, put plenty in customer cars, very powerful. Interested just when you were trying to research the best ECU to go with at that time, what was the shortlist and what was it about MoTeC that made it the pick for you?
I honestly can't remember what the other ECUs were at this point. I think AEM was in the running. Was it Haltech? I'm not sure, to be honest. I can't remember what the original ones were. I think I did have a short list, and I went and talked to Ben. Like I'd already researched it before I took his class. And he was like, yeah, if you want the best, and this is what you got to get. And I didn't understand what the best meant. Knowing what I know now, looking back, I kind of have no concept of what I even knew back then. Like I knew so little, which I went to wire that car from scratch, make my own harness and do all that. And it's like, it took me months to get that car started because I had no help. Like there was no one else that I knew. Interestingly, though, the MoTeC West Coast office at the time for USA, they don't have it anymore, but was a couple, 10 miles from me. So definitely they gave me some advice, but they didn't have specific knowledge to that BMW engine. And I do remember very specifically, though, once I kind of got it going and trying to figure out what I was going to do, because I wasn't sure if I was going to tune it myself yet. And I called up Shane Tecklenburg because he's the
MoTeC guy.
Yeah. And now he's like, he's huge. And I guess relatively he was huge then too. But he was like, yeah, it's $800 for the day to come down and tune it, and it's a whole day. And I was like, oh man, I can't afford that. Like that's a lot. In hindsight, that's not a lot at all. But I just knew nothing. Like I was just diving in. And I was like, I'm just gonna try and figure this out and hope to do it. So I did do a lot of research, but still, like I didn't know, for example, that the 97 M3 cam sensor I was trying to use was a very specific sensor that's not a Hall effect. It's not a VR sensor. It's just like this super special digital pulsed.
That's I think the tricky bit when you're dealing with something that is so unique and you don't necessarily know. I think probably the bit that trips most people up trying to get an engine started on an aftermarket standalone is always the trigger system. Be it a weird sensor like you're just talking about there, that's probably a little bit less normal. But not understanding trigger patterns and how to set that up in the ECU. These days, I think we're a bit more spoilt because most ECUs will have some kind of trigger scope or ref sync capture. So you don't actually need to break out the oscilloscope and see the signals. You can actually physically see what the ECU is actually getting on the ref and sync inputs. And that's just worth its weight in gold in diagnosing some of these issues. But if you don't kind of have a good understanding of that trigger input information, I mean, that's the most critical information the ECU needs, because every calculation for fuel ignition is based on that information being valid.
Yeah. And it's honestly comical, the stuff that I know now and what I was like doing then and the things I was trying. Long story short, I did figure out that it was this special sensor that like won't work. You just got to backdate to an earlier model. And I still had just so many challenges on that first engine getting it started. But that's the thing, like I just struggled through it. Like I'd go work on it like every day after work for like 3 hours, 4 hours. And that's the thing, like while it took me all that time to get it working, that all the struggle is what taught me so much more. If that thing had just started up, I wouldn't have learned anything. So
yeah. The old saying still holds true. You learn more from the failures than you do from the successes. If it just goes super smooth, well, it's almost a missed opportunity, I think. If you're a fan of the podcast and you're interested in topics like engine tuning, automotive wiring, performance engine building, 3D modeling in CAD, or anything else in the high-performance industry, I have something that you might be interested in. Introducing the High Performance Academy VIP package. This package of courses gives you lifetime access to all of HPA's online training for one price. These courses cover everything from tuning and reflashing petrol and diesel engines through to motorsport wiring, engine building, fabrication, design, car setup, and plenty more. Right now, you can get $500 off High Performance Academy's VIP package using the code PODCAST500 at checkout. Becoming a VIP means you'll never pay for another course again. You'll get instant access to all 40 plus courses we currently offer, plus every new course we ever release in the future. Want to define maps or tune with WinOLS? Curious about CAN bus devices or how CAD can help make your dream build a reality? These in-depth topics, as well as many others, each have their own dedicated course that are going to help you master whatever it is you want to learn. And as a VIP member, you're not just getting the courses, you'll also join HPA's online community with lifetime access to our member forums and members' webinar lessons. Again, the code is podcast500 for that $500 discount. Just head over to hpacademy.com to check out the full VIP package and everything it contains. All right, let's get back to the episode. Now, moving on to actually once you had it up and running, you've taken EFI University's EFI 101 course, so you've got a bit of an understanding of what you're trying to achieve and how fueling affects the engine, how ignition timing affects the engine, what MBT is, etc. When you actually came to applying this firsthand, is there any disconnect between the theory and the practice?
No, and I got so lucky on one thing, and that is that I was able to book a mainline dyno for this guy. Had one, and he had just picked it up, and he wanted people to rent it, and he ran it to me for like $300 a day.
Wow.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. So lucky, and he was all excited about it. So we linked the MoTeC to the dyno through CAN bus, which took a bit of figuring it out, and so so it was logging the timing and the engine RPM and the throttle. So I was able to literally go through every cell on that engine and tune the MBT of every single cell, because I would do my little curve on every single load path, and it would give me the little graph, and it'd show me a little dot, and it'd say, hey, this is 26.1 degrees MBT.
Yeah. I do that demonstration for as long as HPA's been alive. We do a live introduction to engine tuning webinar. So we'll invite people along, normally get maybe 1,000, 1,500 people sign up, and on the day maybe between 200 and 600 of those people will actually turn up and do a little 45-minute lesson on the dyno. We talk about fueling, show how that works, and then do some steady state tuning. And then when we get to the ignition timing, I'll do a MBT test on the mainline dyno and show them, sweep the spark from, let's say, 5 degrees through to 50, and it gets that nice curve exactly like you expect. And as you say, it'll show this is MBT. I think it's just such a powerful way of showing exactly what the ignition timing's doing to the engine torque. Interestingly, Todd from Mainline upgraded us to their new Pro Hub firmware, and it's lost that feature.
Oh, really?
Well, there's a different way of doing it with a data log. So essentially, there's a logger that's running the whole time, and if you've got torque and ignition timing, you can log those two parameters against each other and it'll show you that graph. But at the moment, they haven't quite got it back to displaying, and this is MBT for that particular cell. So I'll keep pestering them. It was a great feature, so hopefully they bring it back. That being said, there's so many more features in this new setup that are amazing. It's definitely brought Mainline kind of up to the modern era, I think. But we're not here to talk about Mainline Pro Hub firmware, so we'll get back to your story of learning how to tune.
Well, no, and I mean, that's what I was going to say, because I tune mostly on a dynojet now, and both due to space constraints and just that's what I kind of have. And it's, if I had tried to tune on this dyno and the way it works on that very first engine, I think I would have made a lot of mistakes that I didn't make just because I had that feature. And the MoTeC stuff made it so, I mean, that's one of the big things. It's so easy, with Quick Lambda and with that MBT feature, and it's a single, it was a M52 based engine. So it was had a single Vanos, the inlet cam could just switch from one spot to the other.
Yeah, so not continuously variable, just switch cam.
Yeah, just single. And so it was perfect engine for learning to tune on. Had just enough stuff to change. I could, kind of play with the fuel injection timing and realize that wasn't doing much on a race engine.
But not enough complexity to really get yourself in trouble with it.
Yeah. And tuning the full throttle stuff, all the proper load stuff was ridiculously easy. I mean, it was almost like with that dyno and setting MBT, it just practically does it for you. So I got really lucky with that. The hardest part, honestly, was getting the thing to had huge cams. So getting it to idle well and take off well and transient throttle fueling. Definitely those were challenges that I struggled to get right. But all the full throttle stuff and getting that thing to run just super safe and max power was honestly super easy. It was the easiest part of the whole thing out of all of it. So yeah, so it was immediately on to the next one.
Okay, so at this point, is this where you sort of started doing more and more tuning?
Yeah, I didn't have a plan with it. I just knew that, again, I'm a racer at heart. I definitely at the time was had dreams of being a pro racer and wanted to try and go more towards that path. So,
well, let's maybe park the tuning. The problem with this interview is you do so many different things. I'm trying to thread the needle of keeping them all together in a sensible format. We'll park the tuning because I've got a lot more of that I want to talk about when we get further into the interview. But maybe let's just sort of carry on with the career of becoming a pro racer. How did that sort of develop?
Yeah, and that's another thing. I look back on all the things that I did and the decisions I made on stuff, and I wish I had networked more, I guess I would say, to understand what it took to do these things. I just kind of pushed in the direction of whatever made sense at the time, but didn't really have a bigger plan for it. So I was doing, I just thought being a good driver would make it so I could be a pro racer, which is obviously a fool's errand on every level. So unless you have massive quantities of money and are a good driver, then the path to pro racing is insanely difficult. And again, is more about being there, being at pro races and networking than what I was doing, which was continuing to club race and coaching people and trying to, I just thought if I got really good and eventually I would get an opportunity to test with a team. And at the time it was Grand Am or Speed World Challenge or something like that. So I just didn't really understand how it worked all the way. And I didn't have any people that I was around that were like, hey, dummy,
it's not going to work.
Yeah, you need to go be at the track if you want to get in these cars. So yeah, I was just focused on running the business that I was running, but club racing and doing a lot of that. And I was at the track a lot. I mean, we were doing a lot of racing, and I was, like I said, I was coaching people. But around 2008 or 9, we were we were starting to get sponsors from stuff. So we were doing the 25 Hours of Thunder Hill. I don't know if you're familiar with that race, but the guys that I raced with, we won that a couple times, and we were getting sponsorship from Nitto and Sparco and some other stuff. So I thought I was doing okay, but mostly was just kind of keeping along, doing the same stuff for a while because I didn't understand what I needed to do to move to the next level. So finally, I did get to do one Grand Am race and realized just the level of resources that it takes to do that kind of stuff. At the time it was, for the lowest class, was 40 to 50 grand a weekend.
You can maybe just explain what Grand Am is for those who haven't heard of it before?
Yeah, sorry, it's IMSA now. So they had ST and GS at the time. So ST was like, we built an E90 330, and then GS was like an M3 and Camaros and whatever. So this was still before homologated pro cars. So you had to build your own car, and there were Mazdas, and it was a really cool time for racing, because there was still people were building, the shops were building their own stuff, Beam World and Turner and all those guys. So super cool series, but still, once again, if I had like actually gone to the track before that and spent some time with these teams, I would have realized the level of commitment to be able to do that stuff and the true cost of what it takes. So
just actually a little side tangent here, but just as you mentioned this before, sort of pro cars or factory built race cars were commonplace. Do you think shop built cars versus professionally built cars from the manufacturer, have we lost something going sort of more towards the pro cars? Is it better? Is it worse? Was the advantages?
I would say a lot has been lost, but I think it was necessary with the changing of technology. I think, if you, back in the day, if you had, like, especially pre-turbocharging, you could cheat, but it was a lot easier to get the cars to be kind of equal, effectively BOP, balance of power now, or performance. That was getting more and more difficult as the cars became more and more advanced. And I think for any of the series running these type of cars, the technical know-how to be able to make sure that they're all compliant and then class them all. I mean, I remember when we built our car, there was so many highly specific rules. Like, you had to run a Sabon hood. It was like, if you built an E90, you had to run the Sabon hood, just because they were like, we need everything to be equal. And the first guy that built an E90 did that. And so then they made that the rule.
It's an interesting rule.
Yeah. And there was like that for, if you built a Mazda, you had to use this specific part and this control arm and this thing. So that was, I think, the only way that they could try and make the cars equal. If everyone could do their own thing.
I kind of feel like just making everyone run the stock hood would probably also achieve that and be cheaper.
Yeah, I forget why they had some reason for it. I can't remember why, though. I do know the stock E90 hood was insanely heavy on a non-M3, but the Sabon hood was still like, it had so much. That thing weighed like 40 pounds. It was a joke.
I don't know if it was Sabon, but a friend of mine here locally in New Zealand who had a Mazda RX-8 drag car, and those things are really heavy in stock form, and he ticked the box on every part that Sabon made, as doors, hood, the works. And when I actually picked one of them up, I'm like, there's almost no difference. It was an aesthetic thing rather than a performance and weight saving thing. Yeah, it was definitely not built for performance.
Yeah, no, and it didn't even fit that good. It was. I mean, yeah, that's a total side tangent, but it was such a weird. That was a weird rule. And you had, what they did do at the time, they had switched over to, you had to run a Bosch Motorsport ECU. So this was 2010 when I was building this car. And that thing was terrifying to tune. So I was only a couple of years into kind of tuning, and I get this Bosch Motorsport ECU that is like it's all acronyms. Everything's German acronyms. Like you have to know what you're looking for I still can't get over the complexity of trying to tune that thing. And it was an amazing ECU in terms of its like the background math that's going on in it. But like, dude, tuning that thing was an absolute nightmare.
It's still an ECU that to this day I have not touched, and if I'm honest, I am a little bit terrified of the concept as well. You're not putting my mind at ease there either.
No, I wouldn't touch one again. I've had people ask me to tune them, and I'm like, zero chance. Like in the software, and maybe they've changed it, and I think it was an MS 4.3, I'm pretty sure. It just had this just a list of acronyms. And then you had this like 200-page manual, and you'd have to look up what the acronym was to know what that table was, and then search it. And even then, like the translation of what the acronym was all translated from German. So like, it didn't say like fueling table. It was like volumetric, efficiency, something. And yeah, and trying to figure out what was the cam timing table. It was like, I have nightmares about it.
It sounds unsurprisingly exactly like using WinOLS on a Bosch ECU, because I mean, obviously the technology is the same of their road car ECUs. They haven't reinvented the wheel to make a standalone. It's all the same stuff. But yeah, technical German engineering words. And the other thing, I seem to remember, there's quite a few terms. Really, there is no English equivalent. It just doesn't translate across, which is also fun.
Yeah. The one cool thing it did do is it showed you in the user manual, it showed you the equation of how everything was calculated.
I see, actually know the background math that's occurring.
Yeah. So that was helpful, because then you could actually, you could backtrack to figure out what the name of a table was, because you're like, oh, this is related to this, so that must be, whatever. But yeah, that kind of made me want to give up. That thing was crazy hard. And that's honestly one of the many things that sort of pushed me towards narrowing my focus to just MoTeC stuff. Long story short, I did that, and then I sort of got I put all my resources into building that car and running it, and realizing just how hard this was. And, takes a village to run a race team, I guess you could say, in a way. So I got a little over it for a while and didn't really want to keep pursuing that. And then I was like, unfortunately, I just really do love this. Like, I don't want to go away from this. So at that time, I had been learning a lot. So around 2014, I told my boss at Bullet Performance, the shop that I work for, I want to do more motorsport stuff, like within this shop. Like we can grow this as a business. And we already had people coming to us for stuff. We would work on occasional race cars, but we worked on our own. We worked on some people's race cars, but it was not a central part of the business. And that shop did a lot of revenue. We had like 7 techs and only worked on BMWs, and we were just cranking out BMW service, like really, really well managed. And there's a lot of, that shop taught me a lot about business, frankly. So I want to do more motorsport stuff. And we did that for like 6 months. And I was building, like, the F82 M4 had just come out. So I was the first one building one of those in a race car. I had a client that wanted to do that. And we were doing spec E46 racing and a bunch of different stuff. But after, it was a little over like 9 months, maybe, my boss was like, you're doing more revenue than the service business, but the profit margin is like so bad.
I wanted to query you on this, because I mean, I ran a motorsport based business, and it's a tough way of making a living. I always looked at franchise service dealerships, and a car would come in for a cam belt, and I don't know, it's got a 3-hour book time, so that's what the customer gets charged plus parts, and you've got a tech that does 5 of them, 10 of them a week, and he can do it in 45 minutes. So, the tech gets paid for 45 minutes work. The customer gets charged 3 hours. So that's a nice little bit of margin in there. Whereas I kind of feel with the performance and motorsport stuff, for the most part, it's the opposite way around. You're doing a lot of one-off jobs where you're never going to do that exact same job again. So it's difficult, if not impossible, to price accurately up front. And then you sort of get to the end, and you've put 40 hours into it, and you look at the bill and think, there's no way I can justify this. So the customer sort of ends up getting charged 30 hours. So he's still probably angry and thinks you've overcharged him. So he's sort of going backwards. I mean, that's just been my experience. Is that...
No, I mean, that was the perfect description of what actually happens.
Okay, so it's not just me. Good to know.
Yeah, it is such a brutal business. Like, if you hate yourself, start a motorsport business. That's basically how you do it.
I'd say the flip side of that, though, is, I think if I had started just a general maintenance service business, I'd probably go stir crazy, because it's not exciting and interesting to me.
Yeah, and that was the issue. We had a really successful business, and like, I could have gone and done real estate. I could have gone and done a lot of things, but there's enough there that you can do more than just one thing. Like, obviously we do engine tuning. We're also designing suspension components, and obviously I do driver coaching. Like, there's all these other aspects to it that are not just, you don't have to be super narrow.
It's all around cars, but very different aspects of the automotive performance industry.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, motorsports really is like building club type cars, or it's exactly what you said. It always takes longer than you expect. You're always learning. you can always do it better is one of the other problems. You figure out a good way to do something and you're like, well, if I do it this way, it's even better. So then you try the new way and then you have to learn more. And then it's like, it's brutal, but that's what you have to, if you have a passion for it, that's what you're going to do. You're not just going to stagnate. So he basically looked at it and it's like, he's making 45% margin on service parts. And you're lucky to make 20 on a lot of motorsport parts, which that's gotten even worse in some ways. So 2015, I split off to do my own thing at that point. And had some really good, was able to take the clients with me and that I had. And then weirdly enough, then that's the stage where almost kind of by chance, I started to be able to do the pro stuff. And most of it was because I did have such a strong technical background. While I am a good driver, the guy that I was mainly doing a lot of the international stuff with, paid me to come because I could both drive with him or drive with the team if we were doing endurance racing, but also would consistently, like if we were having problems or car setup or whatever, I always knew what to do with that stuff. Because he actually did, this guy, before I started working with him, he had another driver with him who was just a driver, and he would get frustrated because the guy didn't know enough about anything else. So
you kind of went from not being able to afford to race at that level to sort of accidentally falling into now racing that level and getting paid for the privilege. It's pretty good if you can get to that.
Yeah, and it's funny because what actually happened, this is very interesting. We were one of the first shops to build like M4 race cars because we didn't think that BMW said they were not going to build a GT4 car. So 2014, we started building a couple of them, learned more than I would have liked on CAN bus stuff and other things about those cars. And that was brutal. Like trying to get those to run as proper race cars, you should not touch the stock systems, basically. But I built some cars for this guy and I was supporting him in club racing and some other stuff.
Just coming back a step there, when you're talking about these, new M4s and trying to figure it all out and don't touch the stock systems. It just triggered a memory there. I was fortunate enough to compete in the Bathurst 6 hour last year, albeit in the slowest class there was, just a little Toyota 86, that was fine. And the fastest class cars, there's a bunch of BMW M2 competitions. And they're fast. They're insanely fast. But then they'd go into some kind of limp home mode. They'd end up trundling into the pits, did half a lap at 60 kilometers an hour or whatever it is. And then they'd have guys on laptops and basically control alt delete, send it back out and do another 10 or 15 laps. And then the same thing would happen. What do you know? Is this sort of a common theme with these later model BMWs or later model performance cars when you try and turn them into race cars?
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Yeah. I mean, like, there's so many things that go wrong. And I mean, I have a memory of, that's why we built our B46 race cars. Like, so at one point we were running 4 M4 GT4s kind of all over the world. And so, in a lot of endurance races. So those cars were breaking like constantly. I mean, there was just like all sorts of weird stuff, but we had one race at the 24 Hours of Coda where the car suddenly went into a limp mode like an hour into the race and no indication as to why. It's a factory race car, but doesn't tell you anything on the display, just no power. Comes in, BMW engineer hooks up the laptop, loads the fault codes, and he's like, oh, the inlet temp sensor is broken. And I'm like, the temp, and what do you know? He said the wiring to the inlet temp sensor is broken. And I was like, what are you talking about?
Okay.
And like I said, I mean, I know a lot about cars and I know a lot about engines. And I'm like, that is so unlikely. Like, I can see the sensor, I can see the wiring to it. Like that, it just doesn't make any sense. And so I kind of look over his shoulder, and then I was downloading the data log and looking at that, and I'm like, dude, the temp is just off the scale, is the problem. And I open up the these are water intercooled, and I open up the reservoir, and I'm like, there's no friggin' water in it.
that'll do it. Yeah. So it's actually trying to protect the engine from extreme intake air temperature.
But they used an AIM display on those cars. So they didn't, on the early cars, this was 2018, they didn't have enough memory or what, I never got a great explanation, but it didn't tell you what the inlet temp was on the display, which is insane. Like, you'd think of all the values that you would want to know on a turbocharged race car, like that would be a pretty good one. and no warning for it. So the car had just gone to a limp mode without telling us. And fortunately, I figured out I had no water, and we're an hour into a 24-hour race. And I'm like, okay, well, the only way the water goes anywhere is obviously there's a leak. There's nothing under the car. So it must be leaking into the intercooler on the engine. So anyway, so we fill it up with water, and the BMW engineer, meanwhile, is like, he's like, no. We gotta check the wiring. I'm like, dude, you get out of here. Like, go. You are useless. Go away.
I think that's the disconnect as well between an engineer who may know everything about his job, but maybe doesn't have that practical element of having actually worked on cars, driven cars, race cars, and tuned cars as well. Sort of understanding all of the nuances of something like an intake air temp sensor that's giving him a reading that doesn't seem plausible.
Yeah, and I think it was reading 100 Celsius or something, and it's just not like. And I think the BMW, the motorsport computer, was giving him things that would cause that, and one of them was not intercooler has no water. And even at this point, I knew there was water leaking into the thing, but I was like, we're losing laps, so I just dumped water in it, bled it real quick, put the cap on, sent the driver, and I was like, we have a spare car, so we're gonna practice changing this intercooler. Because like it's not a 2-minute job. I think the book time's an hour and a half. So driver's driving around. We start practicing changing that thing. My guys do it twice. Meanwhile, the car had sucked down all its water again. So it came back in, refilled it, sent it back out, and then brought it in and did the intercooler change in like 3.5 minutes.
Wow.
It was like, yeah, I mean, I had some really good mechanics for sure. But we practiced it, and they knew the tools they needed. They had the parts ready. They knew they had practiced it. And we came back. We had some other actually crazy problems in that race, but we came back and won that race after that.
Wow. You would not expect that.
Yeah, I mean, everyone else had problems too. There was one team with another M4 that put a pack of ice on their fuel pump controller. Like the shit that happens is comical. And
I think with endurance racing, I mean, half of your success or failure comes down to the luck of the draw as to how many problems you had on the day, and not getting tangled up in someone else's accident as well. It's not just about raw lap speed and how good you are as a driver. It's everything has to come together on the day, and you just don't know how that's going to go.
Yeah, I mean, if your car stays running, you have good pit stops, and you don't wreck, you could usually go 4 seconds a lap slower and still compete. Now, obviously not at like Le Mans or the the highest end.
Yeah, that's a slightly different deal.
Yeah, but like most what I call like medium level pro racing, you can where it's not all factory teams, and everyone's obviously depends on the size of the field too. But even then, those races, like there's problems that you don't even know about that the teams are often dealing with on the fly, and alternators not charging correctly, like whatever, all kinds of stuff. So. Yeah, I think that's the endurance racing is such a different animal. It's almost never very rarely about how fast you go. You got to check all the other boxes first.
We inherited the second step on the podium purely because the car that was leading our class, which was 3/4 of a lap up on our entire class at that time, maybe 4.5 hours into the race, and one of the belts broke, which runs the water pump, and that happened, maybe going up the mountain straight. So by the time they got it back to the pits, the thing's toast. There's no way out of it, and so that was just pure luck of the draw. But I mean, I'll take second place however I can get it. Yeah,
I don't know if you know, I did that. I did the Bathurst 6 hour also in I think that was 2018, and we got second overall in a A1 car, I think it was at the time. But that race we almost dropped out of because the car kept going into limp mode pretty consistently coming out onto the mountain straight, like out of turn one. And you would almost, if you were like in the middle of passing someone, it was a BMW 135. So like it had the N54 motor. You get on the gas and the thing would and you'd almost wreck because like some guy's expecting you to go, or they've popped in behind you, or like, you're just, so my co-driver was like, dude, forget this. Like, I don't want to do this.
Too dangerous.
Yeah. Cause you'd have to cycle. So you'd cycle the main, you turn it all back on, and then you'd have to turn off traction control. And meanwhile, you're still trying to shift. Oh, and it was, for us, it was a problem because it was a right-hand drive car, and I don't drive right-hand drive cars. Yeah, I almost launched the motor on like lap one, putting in the wrong gear. It was pretty amazing.
Oof.
But, super minor aside, we went to, when we flew in, we rented 2 rental cars so that we could both practice driving manuals, and we got the cheapest rental cars we could. And my co-driver who's paying for this stuff is pretty wealthy. So they're like, oh, you're a premium super platinum member. We got you these, Mercedes car. And we're like, no, we want like the piece of crap, like with the manual. And they're like, no, it's free upgrade. We're like, no,
we don't want the upgrade.
We want the biggest piece of crap. And they're like, we only have one car with a manual. And we're like, oh my God. So yeah, so I was driving around the roundabouts around Bathurst trying to like learn, how to properly shift, because it's so unintuitive for me. And if you watch the video of that race too, like so many of my left hand apexes I'm missing by like 2 feet because I'm afraid I'm going to hit the wall with the left side of the car. So yeah. Anyway, but that car, I mean, that was another thing. Like that was a technical thing that I was fortunately had worked on so many street cars and knew how this stuff worked. What was happening is that the pan wasn't baffled very well. So under braking, it would lose oil pressure. You didn't know that though. What the result of it was the Vanos could not hit its position. So it would fault out because it had no oil pressure. I don't think they were logging like a proper oil pressure sensor. It just has a dummy light. So we finally figured out it kept throwing this fault. And I'm like, why would it throw Vanos fault? We thought about it and this and that. And then they added some oil at one point and then it went away. And I was like, dude, it's the oil. Like, yeah.
That's the one.
So anyway, we almost dropped out of that race.
That's possibly not that easy to kind of join the dots between those two things, particularly if you're not logging oil pressure. Yeah, it's not an immediate sort of thing that you jump to being wrong, right?
Yeah. And that's the thing with not having standalone too. You don't, I can't just download a log and look at everything and see that, the cam duty cycle, the actuator is going nuts and is 100% and the thing's not achieving its position. Like there's so much, that's one of the beauties of MoTeC. I mean, you can log in and like, if you're logging enough channels, you can pretty much figure out anything. That's one of the things that all that streetcar knowledge and diagnosing all that stuff really helped a lot in running those GT4 cars, because we just had all kinds of weird issues on them, and everyone does, whether it's an Aston Martin or a Mercedes or a BMW. Like all those cars are based on street cars. It's not a proper race car in the sense that it's a street car with a cage and some BMW added some modules to make everything work when they took the seats out of it. But like,
is it not till you sort of step up to GT3 level where now you're actually talking about a sort of a ground up factory built race car as opposed to a modified street car?
Generally, yes. I think there are, I'm not positive on this. There's a couple GT4 cars, I believe, that run standalone systems. I think. I don't know that for sure. So, but the ones that all the BMWs run factory ECUs, but we also had an M4 GT3 and that runs a Bosch Motorsport ECU and is everything's properly controlled, we'll say, and very cleverly controlled on a lot of it. But the stock ECUs are, they're just problematic in so many ways, even for BMW, because when they did the Evo package on that car, the traction control on the car was miserable. I mean, it was useless. Like it would just kind of do its thing that a street car does where it falls on its face. And they had tried to tune it. So the Evo package was supposed to have better traction control, but apparently it still is nothing like a proper, if you have MoTeC and it's doing ignition cuts and all these things, it still would like consistently be behind on helping you if you wanted traction control, and it would overcut or cut too long after you'd picked traction back up if you looked at the wheel speeds. And apparently the issue with that, because I talked to them about it, was inherently like the layers of the firmware in the ECU. The most base layer is emissions based stuff. So like they can't be like, we're Bosch and we own this. Like we're just going to do an ignition cut. It doesn't allow it. Like you can't get to that low of a level in the traction control layer. There's layers below it that don't allow those things to be changed. And I think the complexity of the software is such that they're just not going to do it at that point.
So is this around the fact that an ignition cut for traction control would be devastating for emissions? Is that what you're sort of getting at here?
I think so, yeah. It's weird because it would always do it torque-based with a throttle, which is just way too slow. Like it's never gonna.
You need some instantaneous control.
Yeah,
that latency with throttle. Ignition retard.
Yeah, I mean you would think, but I guess,
but it didn't.
It just doesn't. Yeah, it wasn't in there, and maybe they've done that on the new ones, the G82s. I haven't really looked into it, but on the F82, it just, even with the Evo package, it was way better, but it still was nothing like a real motorsport system.
Yeah, I think for people who maybe haven't tested a lot of different ECUs or systems with traction control, you have the term traction control, so you think traction control is just traction control, right? But there is traction control that it'll stop the wheel spin, but you might as well turn the ignition off, which is going to achieve the same outcome. And then there's traction control that has that so finely tuned that it's barely noticeable, but it's going to stop you exiting backwards through the corner.
Yeah. And
you still get a fast lap time.
Yeah. Well, and you get a better lap time. I mean, you go to Laguna Seca, and if you stand there, because like the pits where the exit of the last corner is, you hear GT3 cars come out of that corner, and they are just riding the track, just all the way out of the corner. And, you cannot, as a driver, achieve that level of control of it's like ABS. Like same thing. Like you can get close as a driver, but you're not going to individually control your wheel speeds, and you're not going to update it 100 times a second with your foot,
It's a funny one with the ABS as well. We did a video on the Bosch Motorsport M5 ABS system, which we've got in one of our race cars, and we did some testing. Everyone says how great the Bosch Motorsport ABS is, but that's sort of, is it the emperor's new clothes sort of situation? I just spent 20 grand on this ABS system plus installation, so obviously it has to be good. And what we actually did was something you never do in a race car, was 200 kilometer hour to zero dead stop. And I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head now, but when we did the test post ABS, I actually doubted I'd written the numbers down correctly the first time around. It just seemed unrealistic. It was that much better. And as soon as we put that video out, people are saying, oh yeah, a good driver can stop just as well without ABS as with it. And my argument there is like, yeah, sure, if your name's Max Verstappen, but even then, like, can you also do that every single time he hits the brake pedal, every single lap, as the tires degrade, as the fuel load burns off, as the track rubbers in, all these variables, and the fact that you see Formula One cars, admittedly not very often, but you see Formula One cars locking up a front wheel coming into a corner. Well, the answer is no, they can't. So yeah, ABS for me.
Yeah. And it's actually super basic. Like you are not, if you had 4 feet and had 4 separate brake pedals, then maybe you could do it like drums, but like each wheel is hitting its own bumps and has its own traction. As you turn in, the front left is losing load. Like there's zero chance you can do it with your foot. So especially in trail braking is where ABS really, really, as you see a Formula One car starts to turn in and now is locking the brakes. It is interesting because I've found that on certain tracks, the ABS, like in an M4 GT3, for example, so Bosch M5, it is worse if you smash the brake pedal. If you're riding the ABS in the corner, it is slower if you're applying too much brake pressure. But if you're using it so that you're right at the threshold and you have your brake bias set correctly, and you're using the ABS to help you over the bumps and help you as you turn in, then that's the fastest way. It's sort of the man in the machine, like in conjunction, tends to be the fastest way. If you're just absolutely hammering the brake pedal and riding the ABS all the way in, you think about what the wheel's doing, depending on track surface and tires, of course. But if the tire is statically sticking to the ground and now it's kinetically sliding and then it's sticking again, if you can just get it up to that threshold and not keep crossing it, then it's going to be quicker. And in lap time, it is quicker.
It's interesting you say that, because when the deal we had with that Bosch Motorsport ABS unit was we were given it by Bosch Motorsport Australia. And we're very open about the fact that, yes, we were given a very expensive piece of equipment, but also from the outset, I said to Bosch, I'm going to report what we find. Chances are it was probably not that risky, because otherwise you wouldn't see them in every GT3 car. But I got told by them, which kind of flies in the face of what you've just said, that you have to retrain yourself to basically, in a hard braking zone, treat the brake pedal like a switch and just hit it as hard and as fast as you can. And the reasoning behind that I was given is, if you get a driver like maybe someone from the Australian Supercars series, they're used to driving analog cars with no ABS, and then they get into a GT3 car and they'll be threshold braking as they would in the supercar. And the problem, he said, is basically if you're just on that threshold of lockup, the ABS unit can bleed pressure off to unlock the brake, but then it doesn't actually have a reservoir of additional pressure to apply back and relock the brake. So whereas if you hit the brake pedal as hard as you can, you've got this reservoir of additional pressure that's unnecessary, but as it locks and unlocks and bleeds that pressure off, it's still got some there. So yeah, two completely polar opposite views on that. I'd take your experience as probably accurate.
Well, no, and I have it in the data that absolutely what I'm saying is true, but it is track and tire dependent. Like on a track surface that is extremely smooth and there's not a lot of like friction once the tire starts sliding. I mean, if you think of the extreme of like wet marble and you're walking on wet marble, you can kind of be stuck, but if you start sliding, you're screwed. Like you're sliding a long ways. So I think very smooth tracks on slicks where there's not a lot of granularity of the surface, there's if the tire starts sliding, it doesn't, the friction coefficient falls off a cliff.
Sure, yeah, that makes sense.
And that's the track that we are doing a lot of thermal out here is like that. If once you start losing grip, you lose a lot. It's not like a little bit versus, there's other tracks out here where the difference between static friction and kinetic friction between sliding and not is 5%, is 10%. It's not a lot because the track surface is so grainy that the tire is just scrubbing across it. So I think that's true on that type of track surface or an in between, but definitely the one that we were doing the most testing at was not true. It was much worse if I jumped hard on the ABS. And I think it's all relative, of course. Say your max brake pressure where you're gonna before lockup is 80 bar, and you're riding it at 120 bar, that's worse. Like you're gonna stop worse. If you're at 78 bar, then of course you're gonna stop worse than if you were just riding the ABS.
Yeah, okay. Yep.
Just a little bit more. So yeah, I think it's all relative. And that's the thing with pro racing. I mean, that's why some of these guys, you watch Van Ginsberg and get in a car, whatever it is, like he figures stuff like that out quick, or Max Verstappen or whoever. That's these next level drivers that you're like, how are they going that much faster than these other pros so consistently? And it's all those little details.
Yeah, it's interesting actually with Van Gisbergen, and he's done quite a lot of GT racing. Well, he did obviously prior to his shift to NASCAR in the US, and I imagine he's telling it like it is. He says that in the GT cars he always wants all the driver aids essentially turned off. I'm not sure if that's just for traction control. Maybe he's just talking about traction control, but his preference is to drive the thing analog, which I guess he's built up that feel and understanding with his career in supercars as well. Not everyone's got his level of skill and feel for the car though.
Yeah, totally. That guy's amazing. And I think, well, one thing I have noticed too is when you run a car with really aggressive ABS in particular, I'm not sure about the traction control thing because that's kind of a no-brainer for me, at least. But the ABS, it does kind of throw you off when the pedal kicks back super hard. Like it's hard to then get your threshold right. So maybe when he's trail braking and stuff, he's like, I don't want this thing bothering me. I'd rather have the tire slip just a little more or whatever. So yeah, hard to say on that one. But obviously whatever he's doing is working.
Yeah, I don't think we can probably use him as a good rule or guide for right. every other race driver should do. Look, Brett, there's so much more that I want to talk about with the racing, but there's also so much more that I want to talk about in general. So I think we're going to park the your amazing international GT racing career for this interview and move on. I want to come actually back to the ECU stuff and talk a little bit more about that. So we've sort of already gone a little way down that rabbit hole with your experience with MoTeC. And what I want to sort of talk about is most of the stuff I guess you're doing now is all around direct injected engines, which I think for a lot of tuners is quite scary. I think it's still fair to say that in most instances outside of pure race cars, DI engines are probably more often being tuned by reflashing the factory control unit rather than fitting a standalone, and that's for a variety of different reasons. But can you give us sort of an understanding of maybe some of the complexities of controlling a modern direct injected engine with an aftermarket standalone?
I mean, I'll definitely say it is an order of magnitude more difficult than port injection, especially if you have none of the calibrations for injectors and the DI pump and stuff like that. And I spent, on the B48 stuff, now that I know everything that I know, it would be a lot easier. But that first round of it, I was like deep into the books trying to figure stuff out and reading all the MoTeC firmware help and things like that. I would say that like, if you can get those calibration files, it's really no big deal. And there is, you need to understand some stuff, but like I had to tune the DI pump stuff from scratch, just figure it out like on the dyno and running the engine, which was time consuming. And I had to come back to it a couple times to retouch up stuff that I had gotten wrong that something else was affecting. And I'll say that's the biggest thing on the new engines is like everything is affecting everything else. I mean, you change you're like, especially because the injectors, you can change the fuel pressure significantly. So a B48 is running I run like 12 megapascals at idle and 35 megapascals at, which I think is 350 bar at high load. And that the fuel pressure changes a lot of what's happening in the cylinder. But more than anything, the direct injection timing is so important. It's like I said before, with port injection timing, you're just like, whatever, open the injector and don't worry about it to a degree.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't. I think that was a big unlock for me early in my career. I just had it in my mind that injection timing on a port-injected engine was just so super critical. And of course, then you start thinking, well, hey, I'm at wide open throttle and 8,000 RPM, and I'm at 85% injector duty cycle. So, clearly the injector's almost open for the entire engine cycle. Moving it around ain't going to achieve much. Sure, at idle and cruise, that might be a slightly different story, but it's never really shown. It's not, how would I put it? It's not maybe the place to be trying to chase power. But yeah, direct injected engines where you really only have a very narrow window where you can inject the fuel, it's going to be a lot more critical.
Yeah, and it's like I was so surprised because I started tuning engines on, and like I said, I didn't know that much when I started about like truly how an engine runs. And so I'm like, oh yeah, sequential fueling, da, da, da. So to learn that like an E30 M3 was batch fired, I was like, what do you mean? So it just sprays the injectors like whenever, like really? Okay, like that's interesting. And even then when I'm sitting there tuning it at idle, you're like, oh, this thing's happy at 540 degrees end of injection before, TDC. It's like, that's crazy, but that's just the way that port works in evaporation. So on the direct injection stuff though, like, yeah, I mean, when you end the injection is super important, but you can't start it too early, of course, because it's just going to spray it out. And it's interesting on all the MoTeC firmware is limited to 360 degrees anyway. Like it's just a hard stop. It doesn't let you move past that. So I've discovered though at high boost on those things where 10 degrees of injection timing, it can be the difference between knock and not. It's like 5-10 degrees in certain ranges. And that's when we're up at like on some of these engines now about 32 pounds of boost. And it's just stock engine, 10.2 to 1 compression. So it is scary in the sense that like if you're trying to push power right away on them, because when I started out on these, especially, we were only really working for about 270 wheel horsepower, so a lot of room for error, and it was built to specific racing classes. But as we've moved up, it's like all that stuff, the injection timing, the fuel pressure, and on those engines too, they have it's like a long rod, small bore, long stroke. So a half a degree of ignition timing can be like 10 horsepower.
Oh,
like it's very finicky, so finicky.
Just coming back to 10 degrees of timing could be the difference between knock and no knock. What's the mechanism behind that?
I think it just has to do with a lot of times it's if you inject it too early, you start the injection too early at high loads. It seems like it must be getting like fuel droplets that are not atomizing correctly into like the corners of the piston or something.
Okay.
I don't know what the mechanism is because it completely goes away as soon as I run higher levels of ethanol. But like on 91 octane, where it's like really, really knock sensitive, if you at lower RPMs, so like 3,500 RPM, if I'm in an injection window of like 350 degrees versus like 340 or 30 degrees, the engine will knock. And then I start dropping it down. But what's funny is if you inject it too late, then you just lose a bunch of power because I think the engine doesn't have time to evaporate all the fuel because you've just injected it too late. So there's this constant threshold that I'm fighting where if I inject it too early, it doesn't, something happens in the cylinder. I'm not entirely sure what, to be honest, where it randomly knocks. And it's like, it's not consistent is the problem. It's not like, oh, it's the same one every single time. It's like, it'll knock. And then if you do another run, it won't. But if you do another run, it will. Again, there's like an inconsistency in the cylinder. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. It's not that it doesn't knock every time. It does knock every time. I just mean like that cylinder, again, in that RPM range. So a different cylinder might knock in that same, but if I move the timing later, so I move it down to 330, 320, now none of them knock. And it's consistently smooth every single time I do a run, even as I move up temperatures.
Yeah, I guess you don't always need to understand the mechanism behind what's going on as long as you know that if I pull this lever here, it goes away, it's fixed. Okay, well, cool. We don't need to worry about that anymore. Sometimes it's nice to know, but you don't always have to.
That's the thing. I do want to know. Sometimes there's so many things that as I've done this, like on the DI engines that I have learned, I have figured out why it's doing certain things. Like for example, because we also delete, like I found BMW's mapping of injection timing. And I was like, this is completely different than what I'm running. Like, I don't like why. And I tried their values and I'm like, this doesn't work. Like, what am I doing wrong? Then I realized we're locking out the Valvetronic, like the variable valve lift system. So when they do that, the reason they're running some of those timing numbers is, are you familiar with Valvetronic at all? Or I guess.
Yep. Well, actually, maybe for those who aren't, though, a quick explanation.
Yeah, sorry. So it's variable valve lift. So at idle, it's like roughly 0.2 millimeters. At full load, it's 10 millimeters. It replaces the throttle body. There's a lot of benefits to it. There's really no benefits on a race car. We get rid of it because we also, on that motor, it's a 3-phase AC motor. Like, so there's just no, and with all these Hall effect sensors in it, zero chance we can run it. But we also don't need to with the way we're doing it. But by reducing the lift, you're also reducing the duration. So the valve opening completely changes relative to where the Vanos is also placing the valve opening. But what I realized is they are both have very little lift and they're opening it kind of in the middle of where the piston is already pulling down to get maximum velocity across the valve. So they inject the fuel right as this crazy airstream comes in. So versus us, we've already had the valve open for a long time. It's, there's a vacuum on the other side of that thing. So there's not much velocity at any point.
Yeah, okay. So it makes sense that their numbers just are irrelevant for your application.
Yeah. It doesn't seem to have any bearing. So like I'm injecting the fuel much earlier at idle, for example, so it has time to evaporate. They're injecting it much later, like probably near like 200 and I think what I saw was like 250 degrees or something. Because I think that's when the valve finally opens and the air swirls in there at high velocity and then they can mix it really well. So
yeah, sure.
Yeah, so some of that stuff has no, I've looked up things that BMW is doing and I'm like, oh, I'm going to try that. And I'm like, wow, this doesn't work at all. This is awful.
Always an interesting experiment though.
Yeah.
Just coming back one step to what you were talking about with the fuel pump control. So again, for those who maybe aren't familiar with direct injection, a port-injected engine, we turn the fuel pump on and the fuel pump runs and the fuel pressure is controlled by a regulator that we don't have any sort of ECU functionality around, but with direct injected engines, completely different. And as you mentioned, they're running incredibly high fuel pressures. Also, we're varying the fuel pressure depending on the operating point and getting control of that fuel pressure so it can track your target accurately all of the time requires some characterization around the fuel pump, which is generally basically run off a lobe on the camshaft. So it's a mechanical, very high pressure fuel pump. I was under the impression that pretty much trying to come up with characterization data for the mechanical pump itself was near impossible for the end user tuner, and that would be something that would almost have to be done by the ECU manufacturer, in your case MoTeC. Obviously it sounds like you did manage to sort of wade your way through it though. So what is the kind of the workflow of doing that?
You can set a value in the ECU where where the timing of it starts. And then you can also just say, oh, it has this many lobes. So like on the early B40, it said 3 lobes. On the later B40, it said 4 fuel pump lobes. So obviously it can flow more fuel. Then you just say, what's the lobe separation? So it's 180 degrees. And so then it kind of already does like a base characterization. Now, I didn't use that at first. I sat there with a dial indicator and measured out the lobe on the cam and tried to put that into the ECU. That did not work particularly well. It got me started though, but only then did I realize, okay, I can still do this with, just this very base value. And then slowly work up the fuel pressure or the fuel flow because it's volume based. So what I basically did is I got it running good enough. And then I let the PI control move me back to where I needed to be. And as I was tuning the car, I kept going back to that table over and over and over, seeing what the PI control was, and then correcting my duty cycle for the pump for that fuel volume. So I basically just slowly worked my way up to having it be, okay, at full flow, this is what and then it had a nice little, the duty cycle table has effectively a cam lobe shape in it. So the first, 10% of flow is a lot of duty cycle effectively. But I think what most people don't realize, and the part that really fascinated me, is the ECU is pre-calculating the volume needed. And it activates that solenoid to engage the fuel flow, and then it cannot turn it off until the end of the cam lobe. So it has to know when it's going to activate that thing and how many degrees of cam lobe it wants to achieve its target fuel pressure and fuel volume.
Right.
So I definitely had a few spikes in there as I was trying to.
Now, is that also calculating for a given fuel pressure target, that volume that it needs to provide based on what it knows the fuel injectors are currently using per engine cycle, or is it?
Yes.
Yeah, so they all work together, and if the characterization of if anything's not right, everything's going to be off?
Yeah. Yeah, and originally, because the sensor, I didn't have characterization data for the sensor that's on these because I didn't have a way to pressurize it to a known 400 bar. And then the sensor on these motors is also digital output. It's not an analog voltage. So I didn't know that my values were wrong first. So I was trying to characterize certain things, but it wasn't scaling correctly. So if it doesn't know the fuel pressure, or you have the wrong translation for that sensor, it can do some weird things for sure.
All bets are off. Well, coming to the characterization of the injectors, which is the next tricky bit, I haven't actually found anyone that I can send a set of port injectors to and get them characterized. Oh, actually, no, that's a lie. You can do that with MoTeC, which is kind of handy. But that seems to be quite problematic if you've got a set of, factory injectors from. I've just gone through this with our Mitsubishi Evo 9. I can't really get proper characterization data for those injectors. And I mean, it's important to have dead time and short pulse width adder data if you want really accurate control. But I mean, I also come from a background where the first Link ECU that I started tuning on, they didn't even know about dead time. There was no dead time table in there. And we could make the engine run. It did some weird stuff, particularly at idle from time to time, but it got the job done. But on DI engines, this becomes just increasingly important. And where I'm going with this is there somewhere you can send direct injectors to, DI injectors to, and get them characterized?
Not that I'm aware of, and I've tried. And I talked to MoTeC USA, and they said no. And they also basically said, we don't know where you can send them. So I was like, okay, cool.
So happy guessing.
Yeah, basically. So I got out an oscilloscope and measured a factory car to at least determine, because it measures the current that's going through the injector and then varies that to pulse it open and then to hold it. And so I measured the voltages too, but you can't do anything with that. It doesn't care. The ECU is doing everything with current. So you have to set those values. But what's really interesting about it is I was surprised by this. Even with the wrong values in a lot of those, because I played with a lot of things on it, the engine still basically ran fine for the most part. The MoTeC hardware seems to do a really good job of running the injectors. And what you will get into is once you get up to high lows and stuff, the injectors will fault out because you haven't put in the right values and it thinks, oh, it's drawing too much current or too little or whatever. So you do have to work on the boost time and things like that. But you can actually do a lot of that on a running engine and not hurt anything. We've got, like I said, 17 of these running in the field now in race cars. And I've never had an injector fail.
This is your B48 engine package.
Yeah. And they're all varying degrees. Some are making 240 wheel horsepower. Some are making 460 wheel horsepower. They all have the same injectors. And I did have to spend some time on the oscilloscope on a street car, on my wife's X3, actually. Fortunately has that engine. But I was able to figure out enough. And then what's weird is I actually pulled the injector linearization table from another injector that I found in the database. And I was like, I'll just use this to start and see. And then after I had tuned the car, I sat there and tried to figure out a way to figure out the linearization data and started changing it and seeing what the effect was and just, changing at load, like steady state, changing one of my favorite things to do to see if stuff is working correctly is just change the fuel mixture aim 1.05 to 0.8.
Yeah, that'll quickly show you.
And what happens, how much of a trim correction is happening. And I tried that at a bunch of different loads and the linearization data seemed fine. So I just stuck with it. I was like, okay, I think I changed it by 0.1 milliseconds. And I was like, this is
stuck with it.
Literally, I got so lucky on a couple things with that setup. And it was actually funny because we got it started really, really quick. And then I've spent the last 3 years fine tuning it.
Yeah.
Because, the transient stuff is direct injection is amazing in so many ways. Starting is I used to struggle to start port injection cars sometimes, especially if you have huge injectors on them. you're kind of just sitting there trying to figure out the basics of if a new engine that you've never touched before and don't know anything about can be kind of hard to get started sometimes. This thing literally, the first time I cranked it just started right up. I was like astonished.
In a good way.
Yeah, totally. One side story real quick. These engines are, the first one we started with was like a 2018 BMW 230 engine. So the early B48. And we were putting it in an E46, and my engineer like lined it up in the E46, put it as far back as he could. And he's like, okay, that's it. And the height is what it is. It barely fits the oil pan to the subframe. So we're like, okay, well, that's definitely where that goes. Put a transmission on it. We're like, oh, let's make a transmission mount. And we're looking at the back of it, and we're like, this is like the back of a E46 transmission. Like, this is very similar. So one of my employees runs out to his car, unbolts his 6-speed trans mount, comes up to this B48 with this diesel transmission that we've got on it, and just bolts it in. The thing literally landed exactly where it needed to be. Like, we were just like, that's
like it's meant to be.
Yeah, that's amazing. So
that never happens.
It was surprising. So definitely had other crazy, weird problems. I melted a high pressure pump solenoid at one point, and broke plenty of stuff figuring these things out. But I mean, never blew up an engine, and it's been a lot of fun because these engines are like so adaptable. I mean, you can do so many things with this little 2-liter 4-cylinder. And then again, with MoTeC on it, I mean, you can, like, the sky's the limit in terms of the ways you can get it integrated to stuff. And we've got on the manual cars, it has auto blip, rev match downshifting, traction control's amazing, being able to set, throttle sensitivity tables and all that stuff. Like, it's a really cool, I keep working with them because I'm like, this does everything we need to do for race cars, like for club racing cars. So
no need to try and reinvent the wheel. It just does everything right.
Yeah. And I will say the big thing, I hate building engines as a business. I enjoy it on the side.
Terrible business. Yeah.
It is the worst. It's so hard. Like, I really respect people that can do that as a business, but like, we were trying to build, one of the reasons we went down this path is because all the S54s that we were using were getting old.
Yeah.
And so we were having to build engines, and it's like, here's $20,000 in parts, and we get one thing wrong.
Exactly. And the margin on those parts is next to nothing anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. Get one thing wrong and you're building a new engine for the customer out of your pocket. You're just underwater on it.
Yeah. And if the bearing manufacturer does the bearings wrong, or the cam, like, you're relying on all these other companies too.
Yeah. No, I could not agree more. Yeah. Terrible business model.
So that was the thing with the B48. We were like, we need S54 power. Our original target was like 330 at the wheels max. And that fits a lot of club racing classes in the series we race in. So we looked around and we're like, what engine can do this? And it was like, oh, this could do this. Like, we think it can. And you can buy them for $4,000. And I literally, to this day, we buy a junkyard engine, we put it in a car. I have not pulled the valve cover on a single one. Like, it just, we changed the oil pan, but
that's really impressive. Now, I think if I got the numbers correct, I think you said varying between sort of 260 wheel horsepower and up to 460. I'm assuming the variability in that power level is just around turbo size.
Yeah. Turbo size, port injection, although we're changing a few other things. I never intended on it really making more than like 350 of the wheels. It was really about these specific club racing classes and to replace the S54. That was sort of the business behind it. And again, I'm a racer at heart. Like, I like racing. I don't need the car to go, like, as fast as possible at any given moment. It's like, okay, we build it to the rules that we're allowed to do. And what's the cheapest, best, most drivable, most reliable way we can do that? Because we want to go, we want our clients to go have fun. That's the point. So yeah, so we were just looking to replace the S54 because I was like, I can't get these from junkyards anymore. They're all 180,000 miles. And
they're an expensive engine to build.
Yeah. Really nice engine, but like,
oh yeah,
kind of they're just old at this point. So problematic.
I just want to come back to a point you just mentioned there with the higher horsepower stuff. You mentioned port injection. So this is kind of one of the issues, I guess, problems with direct injected engines is it's not like you can go to Injector Dynamics or another injector supplier and say, I want an upgraded set of injectors for my direct injected engines. In most cases, that's difficult, if not impossible. So you're kind of limited with the small window that you've got to inject fuel and the maximum fuel pressure that you're able to run. There is a massive fuel that you can get into that engine in that's it. So that kind of limits how much power that it can make. So you're adding port injection, I take it, there over on top. Once you're basically getting to the limit of the factory direct injector, then you're adding port injection as well.
Yeah. And we just have a plate, and it's not ideal. It fits, the injectors have to come in sideways because of space constraints, but we just bolt a plate in between the manifold and the engine. And people make entire manifolds that have injectors, but again, the whole purpose was like, how do we do this as cheaply as possible and reusing as many of the original parts as possible? So we did add port injection. One of the other reasons we did that, though, was over time, the valves get all gunked up if you're not spraying some fuel on them. We don't want to service these cars super frequently. It just made sense and not that expensive to add port injection because we were already running MoTeC as well. So that was easy, at least on the M142. We do have a constraint. We have an M122 package now where we had to unfortunately sort of delete a lot of features out of the whole system because there's just not enough outputs on the M122 to run everything. But also what I just am working on now, there hasn't been a reason to yet, but now with the M122 stuff we're doing, you can just buy an S58 injector off the new M4s and just stick that in the B48. Like it just pops right in. So we're going to do that on some of these engines and see how far it'll go. But it is problematic once you start to run a lot of ethanol.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, when you sort of need to find another 35 to 40% more fuel to make the same power, that's definitely going to be an issue. Just with a lot of people when they're modifying direct injected engines will just block off the direct injectors, fit port injectors, and call it good. I'm interested in your experience. Where is the benefit of the direct injection, and if you were to do that, what would be the difference in the final result in terms of power and torque?
To be honest, if you're running a lot of ethanol, then I think it matters less. Now, again, our port injectors are coming in at an angle, so there's really bad, I think, fuel atomization happening. So we don't use them under like 1.5 bar of manifold pressure. So just half a bar of boost. And then I kind of turn them on so they can start ramping in and get the hot fuel out of them and like try and get them going. But the biggest thing with direct injection that I've really found is if you are octane limited, it is so useful. Like it is so much better than port injection. And if I try and use too much port injection for a given amount of power on like 91 or 93 octane, then the engine is just like, no, I'm not doing this. And there's like kind of little workarounds that you can do, but you definitely end up having to pull a bunch of timing or just not, or it doesn't matter. You just can't run that much boost. Almost makes no difference what you do with the timing. So direct injection, I have engines that are running 93 octane where what we typically do is we run like an E30 mix, and all our cars are flex fuel, but we run an E30 mix at around 330 wheel horsepower, 340, which is where the power a lot of our cars fit into for class rules. And that's really happy with about 30% of the total fuel volume coming from port injection. And the engine just runs. It's so smooth. It gets great economy. And I mean, it's like amazing. On 93 octane, if I'm trying to get to that level, I can't run the port injection at all. The engine is so unhappy.
Wow.
So yeah. So at that point, like I do have an engine running it's called WRL. It's like an endurance series, and they don't want to run ethanol because it's endurance and they're fuel limited for the series. So yeah, that car, the port injection just shut off. I do have it come on a little bit at part throttle on cruise, just so, like I said, it can clean off the valves occasionally. But otherwise, it's all direct injection, and I can't even, I struggle on that fuel. I was struggling to get past like 300 wheel with the port injection, but go back straight to direct injection and actually run it a little bit leaner, and it's fine up to 320.
I have had quite a lot of experience on the Toyota 86 platform, which I think is a really nice training vehicle for learning about direct injection. And of course, that has port injection as well, when we had a M1 plug and play kit on both of our cars that had that engine. And I must admit, when I was naturally aspirated on that engine, I didn't really, it was a struggle to find a big difference between running 100% port and 100% DI. There was a little bit in it, but it definitely wasn't like night and day. But then you're talking, a naturally aspirated engine, probably no surprise there. We ended up turbocharging that engine, but when we turbocharged it, we were constantly on E85. I think it was flex fuel, so I think I might have chucked a very basic tune in it for, pure pump gas, just so I could run it on pump gas if I ran out of E85, but never really pushed the limits. And then kind of to back up your point, when you've got a good octane fuel like E85, at that point, really, again, I needed to use some port injection anyway, otherwise we wouldn't have had enough fuel. But you could have run the thing 100% on port, and it probably, again, wouldn't have made too much difference. But to your point, I guess if I was trying to do that on pump fuel where I didn't really have enough octane, things would be very different.
Yeah, and one other thing about that that's interesting, and I'm curious what your experience on this was, because I haven't seen too much. Stuff like this, when you start to get in the nitty gritty, if you go online to try and look stuff up, it's either like completely wrong or people just don't, there's just nothing out there. And I actually had, it's funny because Google Gemini, that is like the worst program for looking at, or it gives you like a search result if you're looking for something. And a lot of times I end up on your forums, reading stuff or getting info. No, I mean, your forums definitely have some people that actually know things. The interesting thing, I did have Gemini at one point quote something on a B48 that I knew was wrong. And I was like, where did it get this from? And I clicked on it, and it had taken what I had said on a YouTube video where I said something and then was like, I mean this. And it took what I said and
didn't get the I mean this part.
I was like, you're literally quoting me back my own info wrong. Like, this is ridiculous.
That's actually hilarious. Scary, but hilarious.
Yeah. Or at least that. It's amazingly awful when it comes to car stuff. So long story short, and I'm curious what you know on this. I've found that when I'm tuning high power levels, so like for that engine, like 380 wheel plus, it makes a lot more power with port injection. If I'm at the same, and it becomes very sensitive to richness. So if I'm at like 0.87 lambda, say, and basically like 1.8 bar boost, if I phase in more port injection, so if I go from 30% to 50% of total fueling, the car will pick up like 15 wheel horsepower. But if I stick with the direct injection and I lean it out to 0.9 lambda, then I pick up the same power.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I've encountered this a lot, and I'm never sure what to do about it. On some cars, I have exhaust temp sensors because we definitely get up there in the temps, and I haven't been able to spend as much time as I would like on figuring that out. But something happens with the fuel mixing. And in that by the same token, if I'm at like 340 degrees of injection versus 355 degrees of injection timing, when the direct injector starts fueling, I can be at the same lambda, but again, lose 10, 15 horsepower from just that 15 degrees of injecting it too late.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think it's fair to say my experience is much more limited than yours. I've really only had that experience with port and direct injection on an FA20, and it's just that one data point. So I wouldn't take too much from my own experience. What I think I see is you could spend an eternity on the dyno because you've got so many different levers to pull. You've got your injection timing, you've got your fuel pressure, you've got the split between DI and port injection, and then you've got your lambda target as well. So at each point in the map, you can sort of go around in this almost never-ending loop of iterations trying to...
And don't forget, you have cam timing too.
Oh, cam timing too, yeah.
And the exhaust cam timing will change the fuel volume relative to lambda. So it's like, you have no idea. I've gone in freaking circles where I start to make progress and then I keep changing stuff and then I come back around to going, and I'm like, wait, how am I making 370 wheel and getting knock when I was making 390 wheel and it was like perfect with, with more timing, and like, what did I change? Like at what point did I change something that I didn't realize completely affected this? It is fascinating. It's really hard on the new, or maybe I just don't know enough and I'm not good at this, but like it's tough on the new stuff because there are so many levers to pull when you're starting to really push the engine.
Yeah, for sure.
It's easy at like 270 wheel. If you're trying to make stock power 250, whatever, that's no problem. But like, on cars where I'm starting to push, I've had one on the dyno up to 480 and 530 foot-pounds of torque on just a stock B48 engine.
That's impressive.
That thing is so crazy awesome. And we're going to push it a little higher, keep the torque down a little lower. But that's the other thing. Now, I think the stock rev limit on these is 7,000. And I just had a car out this last weekend that we were pushing to 7,800. And it's just like, I've had one guy rev it to 9,500 accidentally, and the thing's been fine. Like they're pretty amazing engines.
It does still amaze me how much headroom there usually, not always, but usually is in some of these factory engines. Just to come back, I think to kind of round out what I was talking about with my FA20 experience is I think when you've come from an entire career of tuning port-injected engines, and you know, if I tune at let's say 0.80, 0.78 lambda at 1.5 bar of boost, the engine is most likely going to be absolutely just fine, no matter how hard the guy beats up on it. And you then start looking at the DI world, and you look at some of the lambda targets that these factory engines are using. You're like, it's a hard pass. But I mean, obviously, it's fine when the technology is very different. So I guess where I'm going with that is I've probably always been a little bit conservative, rather than wanting to chase these scary like 0.90 lambda targets with 1.5 bar of boost. And I know deep down that the engines are doing this, manufacturers are doing this. So it's just, I'd kind of always been probably a little bit on the side of caution there. I mean, I've got all the data in the world as well. We've got, you know, individual cylinder lambda and EGT we did on that car. We don't own it anymore. So I had everything there at my fingertips. But at the end of the day, we had the ability to make more power than the stock engine and transmission was capable of handling. So it's like, well, I could push the boundaries. Maybe I could make the same power with, 2-3 psi less boost or something like that. Or do I just leave it super conservative and be happy that the engine, did 5-8 years of laps around racetracks and never gave us a moment's trouble?
Well, and I think that's the big thing too, because you see all these, like, I call them dyno queens, but like the numbers that people throw out for stuff on some of these new DI motors, but like it won't do that on the racetrack. Tuning on the dyno and tuning on the racetrack is two so insanely different things. And if you tried to run those lambda numbers for an entire, a lap, let alone 8 hours, it just melt the turbo.
Oh yeah. What an engine will handle for an 8 or 10 second pull on the dyno is very different to a lap around a racetrack. Also, one just sort of anecdotal story when we're talking about injector characterization. So the Toyota 86 package from MoTeC comes with a start file. You can start it and drive it, and it's pretty good. And, we've modified from there, and I'd fitted Injector Dynamics ID1000 injectors. So obviously good characterization data with those from Paul Ure. And I knew that was right. And this didn't matter, but I'm fussy, and it just absolutely frustrated me. If I had the VE table perfectly calibrated and I was hitting my lambda targets, if I went and changed the PI to DI ratio, the lambda would be out. I'm like, all right, so the characterization for the DI is wrong. And coming back to what we we're talking about before, I can't get the characterization data from anyone. And obviously MoTeC had the same issue, because that's why it's wrong. And I could have just left it, because typically once the thing's tuned, you're not changing the PI to DI ratio. It's just set. So hey, you're building in a fudge factor and baking in some errors into the VE table. But I mean, yeah, hey, if the engine runs and it hits its targets, really, that's what I care about. But I spent an eternity on our dyno, and I basically tweaked the characterization for the direct injectors until I could go, from a 0% DI to 100% DI, and the lambda target stayed rock solid. And you've got to change that relative to the fuel pressure, and it was a whole lot of faff for absolutely nothing. But I felt good about it after that.
Yeah. Well, and I'm curious, what did you change in the characterization to get it to? Because I still have that problem to a degree, and it's pretty close. But I don't. Anyway, I'm just curious what you changed to get it to.
Yeah, I couldn't even tell you now. That would have been 8 to 10 years ago.
Okay,
now. Yeah, not long after we sort of moved to Queenstown. So yeah, and it's one of those things, like it pissed me off at the time, and then once I'd fixed it, like, right, on to the next thing, I'll forget about that. So what I will do is, once I remember, I'll have a look at my old map for it, and maybe I'll flick you a message and tell you what I changed. So I'm not trying to hide anything from our audience. I just honestly can't remember.
No. I mean, there's stuff, dude. I've started taking notes when I tune this engine, because like the boost control is so complicated on the Pro firmware, especially if you're running a very small turbo. It's like on the stock B48, you can make 400 foot-pounds of torque at 2,200 RPM. I mean, the turbo is instantaneous. And I've realized that I actually need an exhaust back pressure sensor, because when the wastegate closes and transient, the mixture goes just pig rich. Like the engine loses all efficiency. But like getting that thing to, because the way that it's got the boost control system and the boost servo control system, and they both have their own PID setups, and there's all these activation values, especially so like at part throttle. I mean, it's comical. This engine will, with a stock turbo, if you're at like 4% throttle and it doesn't go into boost control, it leaves the wastegate closed, it will just keep building boost up to, a bar and a half. Like it'll just keep going. You're just like, what are you doing? I don't know why MoTeC did this, but for some reason they've made the boost activation purely off throttle pedals. So like if you don't push the throttle down far enough, it never goes into boost control. It just keeps climbing.
Yeah, that's an interesting choice.
Which I don't think they counted on having such a small turbo.
No. It's interesting. One of the things I found when I started tuning the torque-based Pro firmware on our 8.6, and the torque-based firmware, you can ask for whatever torque you want. And I got into this situation where I was asking for, at a certain driver pedal position, I was asking for way less torque than the engine could produce. So the firmware closes the throttle, which is fine. But then you end up with a lot more, the turbo's still making whatever it is, 25 PSI of boost or something, or 24 PSI of boost. So I found that under those conditions, we wanted to actually incorporate EMAP into it, because we were seeing, as you were saying there, the lambda would be out the gate rich under those conditions. It became a moot point because I don't really want to get into a situation where I'm bringing the throttle down to 25% to meet my torque aim while I've still got 20 plus PSI of boost. So, you incorporate your boost targets into your torque targets so that, within reason, you're always running, maybe 70% throttle or something like that. You've still got that control, but everything sort of lines up and makes sense. And that way the VE table remains accurate. Have you sort of found anything like that with that torque-based tuning?
Yeah. And I should mention the cars that I'm running the stock turbo on, I'm running like GPA or GPR firmware, which has proven to be extremely problematic in a lot of ways. I've tuned around certain things, but I am on a path where I'm like, okay, I wish I had like an in-between of Pro and GPR, which is, I keep saying they're making notes. I'm like, okay, I'm going to make my own firmware for this thing. But on the torque stuff is so useful, but so complicated sometimes. And like what you're talking about, because you can sit there if you're running a circuit racing car, that's amazing. I can make this thing so that it's got boost on tap at any moment, but I can still limit the power. And I've gotten into a lot of situations where the system starts, chasing itself. The throttle is like, oh, I want less torque. And so it cuts it, but then that causes the boost to fall. So then it increases it again, and the wastegate starts chasing, and like everything starts chasing each other. And that's what I was saying with like, I'm writing myself notes on this thing that I go back and read because I forget, like I change all this stuff. There's so many values. You start changing Kalman gains and you're like, what the heck does this actually do? And you read the MoTeC thing and you're like, okay, I'll try that. Well, that's not doing what I thought it was doing. I just realized recently, for example, that like if the Kalman throttle gain is not 1,000, is anything less than 1,000, then it over responds to stuff. And somehow on one map because I have different maps in different cars, I must have changed the Kalman gain thinking it was the Kalman map gain, if you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. No one else will, but that's fine.
Yeah, no, and the stuff that's in there, you just keep going deeper and deeper, and you're like, dude. But it's funny because at first I was like, why is this so complicated? Like, does it really need to have all these different crazy values? But then I do find I get into a range where I'm like, oh, well, I need it to do this thing, and that's actually not an option. I want boost margin to be adjustable based on RPM, not just a single value. I want, and you're like, I wish there was more complication now. So
yeah. It's such a tightrope for them to walk. And I think probably MoTeC, while I love the product, probably veers a little too far on the side of over complexity. And I don't know where that sort of happy medium actually sits, because I consider myself to be a pretty advanced tuner, and I like having as much control as possible. So I've got the more levers I've got to pull, the better, because that's going to allow me, as long as I know what I'm doing, to get the calibration better. But I know that for an average tuner or a novice tuner who's just getting started, you open up M1 Tune and they're like, what is this? And where do I even get started? And the problem, I guess, is that when you've got so many different parameters that you need to dial in, it's very easy for someone to get themselves so lost and so far out of the ballpark that they can't even get their way back. So it's a difficult one. I mean, obviously the MoTeC product probably is targeted more towards professional motorsport than your average sort of lightly modified street car. It's not to say you can't put it on one of those, but their target audience is probably normally a more advanced tuner, I would expect.
Yeah, I would think so. And I think, yeah, if you have if you're trying to learn tuning, certainly an M1 is not, I mean, GPA is not bad, but still you're going to get pretty lost. And I'm lucky I started with an M800, and that's just the right amount of complexity, really. It was still overwhelming at the time, but looking back on it, it's it does what it needs to, and not way more. The first time I was tuning acceleration enrichment and the whole idea of wall wetting, I was like, this is crazy. And I thought that was some hyper advanced feature. Now I know it's absolutely necessary for the thing to work on a port injected car. But I think a link ECU is, a good amount of complexity. And that's one of the reasons, for me, MoTeC is so complex, necessarily so, especially with the new stuff. Yeah, if you're running I don't know, a BMW M54 or anything from mid 2000s, say, or late 90s, an M1 is overkill. You don't need it to run that. But on the new stuff, it is absolutely necessary. And I'd use ECU Master products as well, and they were trying to get me to use one of their new DI boxes. And while I love their other stuff, I kind of looked through their firmware and I was like, I'm just not interested in starting over on this thing.
I think once you've developed a knowledge on a product, it's doing exactly what you want it to do. There's going to have to be a fairly specific use case for then going and starting over again with something completely different. I mean, granted, cost may be part of that, but sometimes the cost saving is not worth the features that you lose, or perhaps the learning curve that you have to go through in order to get back to where you were.
Yeah, and I think kind of what I was going to say too is they updated to MoTeC 1.5, right? M1 Tune 1.5. And I loaded that and I looked at it and I was like,
I'm very keen to hear this story.
Dude, forget it. I don't even, and I actually felt like a Luddite. And originally I was like, oh yeah, I'm that guy that's just this new, I'm a carburetor guy and fuel injections for a bunch of, the carburetor works just fine. No, but I loaded that and I was like, dude, I know where everything is in 1.4. I know all the hotkeys. I know, I like the layout. I'm just going to stick with that.
And have you?
I have, yeah.
Okay.
I've delved into 1.5 a few times, but I'm
in discussions with MoTeC in Australia at the moment because they would dearly love us to produce some content around Tune 1.5. And I've done exactly what you've done. I've been using Tune 1.4 for forever. And to start with, if you've transitioned from Haltech or Link or ECU Master or anything, it's a lot to take in. All of the different workbooks and worksheets there's a lot, and you slowly get used to it and understand the workflow. And I do sort of find myself using all calibrate quite often to find a parameter or a table.
Every time it's all calibrate.
Yeah. And I think that's probably something that MoTeC see happening, and they're like, okay, well, if someone's continually going to all calibrate, and for those, I'll just quickly explain for those who don't know what the hell we're talking about here, the MoTeC Tune software is very specific in what parameters and tables are displayed, and sometimes you can't find on a particular worksheet what you're looking for. So they have a tab called All Calibrate, and it's just got a search function. You type in what you're looking for and it'll pre-populate with everything that's got that name in it. So that's kind of how you find the things that you can't easily find. And as we're saying, most tuners are using that All Calibrate quite frequently. I think MoTeC didn't like that. Okay, this means that probably we've got work to do, which is where Tune 1.5's come from. But it is, did exactly the same thing. Opened it up, had a play with it a few times. I could learn this new system, or I could stick to what I can do in my sleep because I know it inside and out, backwards and forwards. But maybe it is the carburetor versus EFI thing, and maybe I just need to man up and actually put in the time.
Oh, for sure, we both need to. But I also think that you unfortunately, we have been doing this long enough that we know our ways, and that's true of everyone in every industry. And I think some 20-year-old who's getting into this, who's starting, absolutely use 1.5. And I should learn 1.5, but unfortunately, when the car's on the dyno, I need to tune the car. I can't sit there and mess around with some new software. So
speed and efficiency is important. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the exact same reason that I only use MoTeC. Like the ECU master stuff probably would run the engine okay, especially with some of the new things they've come out with. But it doesn't matter. I know MoTeC. I have packages for it. I have all these different tunes. I have all this knowledge of what all the weird stuff does. So it's like once you've put all that effort in, like it doesn't make sense to keep reinvesting. There's something to be said for constantly learning new things, but also you need to like learn the things that matter.
Yeah, well, I mean, particularly when it's a business that you're running as well. That is important. I think I quite often get asked, what ECU should I put in my car? And this is coming from a standpoint of I'm not going to tune it myself. I'm going to take it to a professional tuner. And my answer is always the same. You use the ECU that the tuner you've chosen suggests. And they're not suggesting that ECU because they're making 40% commission on that versus 20 on something else. Most professional tuners, and I fell into this category as well, will align themselves with, I was two ECUs. I was MoTeC and I was Link. Did a little bit of Haltech as well, but at that time Haltech wasn't super popular in New Zealand. And I felt that those two products basically covered the price points that my customer base would accept and gave the features and usability that I needed for both ends of that market. And there would have been another dozen ECUs out there that would have probably also fit the bill. But the problem was I knew the Link ECU and the MoTeC 100 series inside out, and I could get the job done quickly. And because I knew those ECUs so well, I was able to provide better results. Someone could have bought me in a car fitted with a $20,000 Bosch Motorsport ECU. And A, I wouldn't know where to get started. And B, because I don't know the system as well as I know these other two, I'd probably almost certainly provide an inferior result despite the expense of the ECU. So kind of my long-winded point here is take the advice of your professional tuner. They're probably going to have a product that's going to fit your budget and the requirements of your engine and vehicle. And they're not trying to stitch you up because they're going to make more money on a particular ECU. You're just going to get a better result. Does that sort of fit your experience as well?
Totally. And the hardware cost often is just a fraction. The hardware cost difference, I should say, between two ECUs is a fraction of what the total project is. And if you come out with a, 30% worse result because you saved $600 on a cheaper ECU, it's like, what was the point of the whole thing to begin with? But man, I made the mistake of thinking that I could like easily just learn software. Engine's an engine, it's just an interface otherwise, right? But the architecture in the background of the ECU and how certain, obviously fuel and timing or whatever, but as you get more advanced on engines, things get a lot more complicated. And I did Cyvex, I especially because I went down the plug and play route for stuff, which it was kind of a mistake. But Link had their E36 plug and play, Cyvex had E92, and I've done Cosworth, I've done freaking the Bosch one was a nightmare. The Haltech, AEM, a bunch of SOD4s with AEMs, those were awful. Those had so many weird problems. That's the other thing with the hardware too. MoTeC is so reliable. Like their hardware is so freaking reliable.
Yeah.
And I've seen so many weird problems with other ECUs. AEM was a big one where the throttle drivers kept failing in them.
Oh, right.
But yeah, they kept having all kinds of weird issues. And AEM did warranty a lot of them, but that was a constant issue that would ruin people's race weekends. The thing would just go into limp mode.
Yeah, the fact that you're getting a warranty on it is helpful, but it's not going to help you on the day when your throttle fails on the racetrack.
Yeah, and most people can only go to the racetrack 6, 7, 8 times a year. So it's like it depends, obviously, but like if you're going to spend the money on a standalone ECU, the $800 difference that they saved on the AEM. But I will say that there's a lot to be said for plug and play stuff because wiring is hard. Wiring is consistently hard. So
100%. Yeah, I think it solves a lot of problems for a lot of people, and almost always it's going to be a cheaper way of getting your car onto a standalone if you go plug and play. Yeah, the ECU is usually going to be a little bit more money than just a universal wiring, but as soon as you have to factor in the wiring cost.
One thing I've thought about on that too, because we're making a plug and play harness for the B48, and originally I was like, yeah, we can just take the stock harness, cut the end off, put it into the MoTeC. Like it's not that hard to do. But I sold 4 packages that went to other people where they did the wiring. And every single time I logged into that ECU, it was like, oh, look, there's like 32 little air flags here. Like, I've gotten really good at logging into those ECUs on my firmware or my package and being like, yeah, this is wrong. This is, here's a list of things. Go do that. Call me back when you're done. And I'm always proud of the fact that pretty much the first time they hit the starter switch, the thing starts right up after fixing all those problems. But like every single one, and these are guys that generally know what they're doing, but there's so many wires on these things.
Just so much room for error.
Yeah, and it's hard. I mean, it's just hard. So so we're doing MoTeC plug and play harnesses for these, where you'll just be able to plug the thing in and I provide the software and you start it and you're good to go. So
basically, bolt a transmission onto the back of it, build some engine mounts, and go racing.
Well, we make the engine mounts too. We're making like a full. If you actually go to our website, we now make we have like a huge document that tells you how to put this engine in an E46 and an E36. Tells you the coolant fittings and the plumbing and how it's all like. It's a complete work through what transmission you can use. There's different ones. Obviously we're trying to sell people hard parts for that, but we make the Valvetronic lockout, the engine mounts, trans mounts, like a thermostat delete for the M122. Are you familiar with like the heat management module stuff on these?
I'm not.
Yeah, that was something really interesting. The new engine. So when we're running the M142, unfortunately, the Pro firmware is able to do this somewhat recently. Instead of a thermostat, there's a dual H-bridge ball valve that turns back and forth to direct coolant down different passages. And then it uses a scent signal for its position instead of like a normal analog. So literally to get that work the first time, because I didn't use Pro firmware on the very first cars because I didn't realize it, we ran out of H-bridge outputs. Because there's so many on the motor. So we had like a separate module that the display would take the position of the thermostat, and then it would send a signal to this separate ECU master dual H-bridge module, and that would then tell the thermostat what to do. And so fortunately, the Pro firmware runs that thing perfectly. But on the new stuff, we also now we've made like a thermostat delete or HMM delete that just makes it into a normal thermostat that can just be pulse width modulated, basically. So
I think probably for a race car that actually makes more sense. Keep it as simple as you can. Sometimes wins the day.
Yeah, yes and no. Only in that I love parts that are factory. Like people hate on factory parts all the time, but
yeah.
They're like, oh, it's plastic, it's going to break. And I'm like, to me, that's lightweight and easily replaceable. Like that's what that looks like to me. So that stuff does fail on cars, that have 100,000 miles on them. But like,
of course,
this engine has been, there's a lot of plastic parts in the engine, but that's part of what makes it light. And again, anything that we cannot change, that I can take that thing from a junkyard, stick it in a car, and go run it, I am intent on leaving that unless we absolutely have to change it.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, too many people are intent on, they want to delete the oil filter housing. And it's like, okay, so you're going to have a plate with lines and a separate filter with more lines, with more, like how many failure points do you have versus like
heaps more failure points. Yeah.
So, and I know that from experience. Like you change stuff and there's so many unintended consequences when you change things. So BMW has different reasons to engineer stuff different ways, but they're really good engineers. Like they build nice stuff, and people, are like, that's stupid. I don't know why they did that. And I'm like, that's because you don't understand what they're doing. They're not stupid. You just don't know what they're doing.
Yeah. Everything is done for a very specific engineering reason. We just don't necessarily have insight into what the engineers were thinking when they design a certain part.
Exactly.
Hey, look, Brett, we are now coming up towards 2 hours 20, I believe. And I think of my 10 or 12 talking points, we've managed to get through a whopping 3 or maybe 4. So it's clear to me that we're never going to get through the rest of this, and I do want to respect your time here. So my suggestion is we're going to wrap this one up here and now. And what we're going to do is reschedule you somewhere in the future, and we're going to get you back to cover off all the other stuff that I really still want to dive into, because there's just so much here that is interesting. Hopefully everyone who's been, well, if you've made it this far, chances are you've probably also been interested by it. So Brett, we've got the same 3 questions we ask all of our guests. And the first of those, what's next in the future for you?
We've done a lot of like race support and other stuff. So I've learned a lot, unfortunately. So we're a lot more focused on engineering and parts, like hard parts. We're making suspension pieces. We just made a billet upright for the E46 and then the B48. We will do B58 stuff soon, but I just haven't needed to, in a sense. We've had so many projects with the B48, and I've been having a lot of fun with that. And we're putting it in some street cars and stuff now. So yeah, we're focused on making a lot of parts and then a lot of B48 stuff, and making it, super plug and play for people, because I think it's such a good swap engine.
Yeah, I mean, you've sold me on it, to be honest. Sounds great. All right, next question. Is there any advice you'd give to a younger version of yourself to help reach where you are today in your career faster?
2 super big takeaways is, one, if you've put in a lot of work, like, know your value. Know that if you've truly put in the work, don't sell yourself short on like what you're capable of and what you're worth, and what your services are worth. Because this industry is very hard. And if you've put in that time, then you should appropriately charge for it, is honestly a big one. And then beyond that is really think through anything that you're planning on doing. Think through the next couple steps, not get excited about the thing that's in front of you and what you want to do with it, but really like, what's it mean after that? And, just as a short aside, and we'll probably talk about it on the next one, but the B46 race cars that we did, there was some amazing things that we've done with those cars, and we've built 13 of them. And it's an amazing car, but I didn't think through a couple later steps of what building those cars meant and the things that we were going to be reliant on to build them. So really, really long-term planning, I guess, but like always, like, what's the next step after that? Well, what's that mean? And yeah, that would have been smart a number of times in my life.
I think that's great advice. I'd probably temper that with the fact that sometimes you sort of, how'd you put it, maybe you don't know what you don't know. It's hard to kind of gaze into that crystal ball and see all those steps.
Yes.
I mean, but you can only do what you can. And I think the important takeaway from your point, though, is at least if you're thinking in that way, like, what are these next steps, rather than just living in the here and now, that's definitely smart advice.
Yeah, you're still going to get caught out for sure.
Of course, yeah. Maybe caught out less.
Yeah.
I think with the your point about knowing your value as well, I mean, that's certainly something that I fell into that when I was at the start of my career. I was doing some tuning just as on the side while I was studying for my master's, and I was doing a lot of tuning for some local rally cars, and I kind of almost felt like maybe like an imposter, and definitely wasn't charging at that point what my services were worth. So yeah, I think you also, I think if you're charging yourself out at a rate that's too low, there's sort of a perceived value around price point. So if you're charging out yourself too low, you're charging $500 for a tune and everyone locally is $1,000. Almost people look at that, well, like, oh, it can't possibly be any good if it's $500. So you're almost shooting yourself in the foot there anyway, I think.
Yeah. And you'll still get, the thing is, you have to realize that you're still going to get people that are like, well, that's too much. That's ridiculous. I can't believe, but like, they're wrong. And they weren't going to pay $200. Those people don't matter. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, you can't keep everyone happy, and nor should you try.
No. And I think it is important to realize, like, exactly what you just said. I had the same issue with feeling or putting in the time to solve problems, and then you fix the problem and you're like, oh, well, I guess I should have known that. I should have done that first, only to realize that, like, no, you had to go through the steps, and it's unlikely someone else could have figured it out faster. You got to charge for it. So
absolutely. I think that where that goes almost the other way, though, is where you come into a job and someone's been driven crazy by this problem that no one's been able to fix, and they've poured hours and hours into it. You sort of look at it, look through the thing, and oh yeah, I know what the issue is, and you've fixed it in 5 minutes. And so what do? Do you build them for the 5 minutes of time or the 20 years of experience that you've gained along the way? It's a tough one.
Yeah.
All right, our last question for today, Brett, if people want to follow you and find out more about what you're up to, how they're best to do so.
Instagram, Strom Motorsports, and I'm starting to be more active on YouTube. I'm trying to make some more content and try and actually share some of the. I feel like I come across so many super interesting things, and I see like some of these other channels that just cover like hyper basic stuff over and over. And I'm trying to do a little bit more of like sharing some of my knowledge now and just do some videos. I just did a video on Valvetronic. So YouTube I'm steadily becoming more active on that. And then our website, strommotorsports.com, is where I'm probably going to hire a media guy soon because I'm not good at it.
It's a big job.
And I get so busy with the technical stuff and the clients and everything else. So I'm at a point where it's like, okay, we're actually selling product, but I'm not putting anything out there. So yeah.
Okay. Well, as always, we'll chuck those links in the show notes so it's easy for people to find you. Look, Brett, it's been an incredibly interesting chat. Like I say, I would like to have kept on going, but we want to respect your time, so absolutely we'll have you back. But thank you for sharing your story with us today.
No, thank you. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Tuned In, and don't forget, by using the code podcast500 at checkout, podcast listeners can get a huge $500 off our VIP package, which includes over 40 current courses, as well as a long list of courses to be released in the future. As a VIP, you'll also get lifetime access to our members-only webinars and our community forum. Lastly, we'd love it if you could leave a review or comment on your preferred podcast platform. Your feedback really helps us to reach a wider audience, which in turn allows us to continue bringing you more high-quality guests. As a thank you, each week we'll randomly select a review or comment from Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube and send the winner a free HPA t-shirt shipped anywhere in the world. It's also a great place to ask any questions you might have too, and if your review or comment is chosen, I'll do my best to answer them directly. So this week, a big shout out to Matteo Heller, who has said, always excited when a new episode is released. I always learn something that I can integrate into my personal Sylvia project or just good bits of knowledge for the future. Keep up the good work, HPA team. Oh, thanks for the kind words there, and we'll certainly be sure to keep these episodes coming. Great to know that you're using them in your own project. If you get in touch with your t-shirt size and shipping details, we'll get a fresh tee shipped straight out to you. All right, that concludes our interview. And before we sign off, I just wanted to mention for anyone who's been perhaps hiding under a rock and hasn't heard of High Performance Academy before, we are an online training school and we specialize in teaching a range of performance automotive topics, everything from engine tuning and engine building through to wiring, car suspension and wheel alignment, data analysis, and race driver education. Now remember, you've got that coupon code. You can use podcast75 at the checkout to get $75 off the purchase of your first course. You'll find our full course list at hpacademy.com/courses. Important to mention that when you purchase a course from us, that course is yours for life as well. It never expires. You can rewatch the course as many times as you like, whenever you like. The purchase of a course will also give you 3 months of access to our Gold membership. That gives you access to our private members only forum, which is the perfect place to get answers to your specific questions. You'll also get access to our regular weekly members webinars, which is where we touch on a particular topic in the performance automotive realm. We dive into that topic for about an hour. If you can watch live, you can ask questions and get answers in real time. If the time zones don't work for you, that's fine too. You're going to get access as a Gold member to our previous webinar archive. We've got close to 300 hours of existing content in that archive. It is an absolute goldmine. So remember that coupon code podcast75. Check out our course list at hpacademy.com/courses.